This is another Infosol production.
Wow, that was some great music. And I think, Tamika, you provided that. But anyway, everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to This Business of Cannabis. How can I get down? This is day 1 of 2. We are calling this a masterclass of sorts for folks who are thinking about entering into the cannabis industry in New York State. But this time we're going to have a little twist. We're going to focus on the Mid-Hudson Valley. Usually the city gets all the love with these kind of events, but we wanted to focus on the farmers and the makers and the legacy market that's pretty rife and alive in the Hudson Valley. And I have to give a shout out to our sponsors, Hudson Valley AgriBusiness Development Corporation, along with American Farmland Trust. You'll hear more about them later on. They, along with Season Gives, reached out to us at Awaken.Space to come up and put on this summit. But at that point, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague and co-host, Tamika Dunkley. Tamika, what's up? How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. Welcome everybody for the Business of Cannabis. So glad that we had.
We have a little Wi-Fi issue, which often happens in the Hudson Valley, and that's something we have to address as well if businesses in Hudson Valley are going to take off. But while Tamika's coming back, I want to just talk about the programming today. We have a jam-packed lineup for you. We have a panel on the political landscape, cultivation strategy for our farmers. We're going to talk about key careers if you don't want to be plant touching, and also what licenses and other opportunities are available from the Office of Cannabis Management. Tamika, you're back?
I'm back. I don't know what happened with the internet. But it's really an incredible panel discussions that we have for you guys today, and especially creating some platform and some basis for people who wouldn't necessarily be able to access that information. As you had said, the Hudson Valley many times gets lost. The New York City markets. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Well, we'll come back to Tamika and we'll work on these tech difficulties. My name is John Gilstrap from Awaken.Space. I've been in the industry since 2016. I'm a vertical hemp farmer in the Mid-Hudson Valley. I also do strategy consulting for a lot of folks and MSOs in the cannabis space. And like many folks are looking to transition in some fashion to the cannabis market. But Tamika, are you there? Okay, well, she's going to come back. Well, we're going to hop right into our first panel on the political landscape, and we'll come back and reconvene after that. This one is really interesting. I'll give you the background of prohibition and where the fight is today. Thank you.
This is an original instrumental.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first panel of This Business of Cannabis Summit. We have some really exciting panelists here today that are very smart and I think they're experts in their respective fields. So just give a little background. New York State is well underway with their adult use program. We have adult use cultivation program up and running. We're soon to have a conditional dispensary program up and running. We have some regulations around laboratories and extraction facilities coming up. So, the starting pistol is on its way. But I think it's important to look at the historical perspective on where cannabis has been and where it's going. I'm reminded of a Maya Angelou quote that basically says, and I'll read it, so I don't want to get it wrong. I have great respect for the past. If you don't know where you are coming from, you don't know where you're going. So I think it's very important as new folks come into the space to understand that, there's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in this industry. in the United States and particularly in New York as well. So I brought a group of panelists together here, and they'll introduce themselves very shortly to talk about the various stages of cannabis prohibition, decriminalization, and where we are now. So I'm going to turn to our folks, and I'm going to pick on Annie first to go and give her background.
Forgot I was on mute. I'm Annie Rouse. I am the co-founder of OP Innovates. We have a unique delivery system that improves bioavailability of cannabinoids into the bloodstream. I got into cannabis and hemp sector back in 2009, really on the research and policy side, trying to understand why cannabis and hemp became legal in the onset. And that really drove me into the industry, ended up receiving a Fulbright scholarship to study the environmental impact of hemp in Canada, and then came back to the US and got into the hemp industry in Kentucky, where I really got my feet wet and started several companies, a couple brands, a manufacturing entity, and then got more onto the historical research side, where I launched my podcast, Anslinger, The Untold Cannabis Conspiracy. It's been a couple years since I published an episode, been a little busy with some of the other entities, but hoping that this will be a nice inspiration to bring me back into publication.
Great. And I listened to that podcast avidly, and some really great stories. I'm sure we'll get into that during the podcast. Mellissa, you're up next.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Mellissa Moore. I use her pronouns. I'm with the Drug Policy Alliance. And I serve as the Civil Systems Reform Director, which is a relatively new initiative within the org. We're looking at the impact of the drug war across people's lives, not just in the criminal legal space, but the ways in which lives have been upended in so many other aspects of the way that people have to move through this world, and the way that that's been done in a targeted and racist way because of the drug war. Prior to this, I was leading our New York State Policy Office, so working on the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act and prior efforts as well to address the marijuana arrest crusade in New York, which we'll talk a lot more about, but I'll kick it back to you right now, John.
Lawrence?
Yes, well, first and foremost, John, thank you so much for moderating the panel. It's a pleasure to meet you, Annie. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mellissa. My name is Lawrence Hudson. I am the Government Affairs Associate with Kronos Group. We are an international cannabis company that does adult use in Canada, medical use in Israel. And out here, we have our Lord Jones brands, and the Lord Jones brands are CBD based. We're waiting until it is federally legalized for us to be able to enter the adult use American market. And just a little bit more background about me. Last year, I graduated from the Howard University School of Law last year with a Juris Doctorate, master's degree from Syracuse, bachelor's degree from St. John's. And just throughout the course of my life, I've seen the ways that cannabis has been used to harm and has also been used to heal. You know, at the same time, I have a bunch of cousins who have been arrested with these charges. And now I can go to New York and see Apple stores basically of cannabis. But at the same sense, I also have family members who've suffered from cancer, and I see the therapeutic benefits of cannabis. And once the opportunity came for me to become the Government Affairs Associate at Kronos Group, I jumped on it because I understand the power that this plant can have, not just to heal people, but to heal communities, to heal from the negative history that we've had. And I'm here basically, just to give my thoughts and opinions on the federal legalization aspect of it. A few things that's happening in some states, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation with you all.
Great. Thank you, Lawrence. That's really great. And you brought up the medical side, and maybe we could touch upon it. A lot of our big pharmaceutical firms today were originally researching cannabis at the turn of the 1900s, and so they were steered away for a bunch of other reasons. So I think when, folks who are canna curious now are entering the space, their reference of cannabis, I think is more current, if you will, or, within the 30 or 40 years with the war on drugs. But I want to take it back to some of the roots, because I think it's just more than a law enforcement tragedy or criminalization tragedy. This was, in my opinion, a global conspiracy around the plant. And Annie, maybe you can kick it off and just maybe give some of the history and the background on how we got to a prohibition of cannabis in the U.S.?
Yeah, so as I'm sure you guys are familiar, it was a very long road. It definitely didn't happen overnight. Some of the first rules that were enacted were as early as 1906, and a little bit after that with the Pure Food and Drug Act, which really required labeling of different active ingredients on labels, cannabis included. Then there was the Harrison Narcotics Act in 1914, which really was meant to push heroin and opioids into a controlled framework. Cannabis was not included within that. However, it was starting to be talked about during that time frame. Then in 1931, the Limitations Convention occurred at an international scene, as was the Harrison Narcotics Act. That was really the first movement to start restricting drugs on an international basis, and really is what established the black market as we know today. From that point forward, then the Uniform Narcotics Act came into play in 1932. That was, again, a means to control drugs. There was this hodgepodge of regulations for opioids and heroin throughout the state, much of like we have it now with cannabis. And within that Uniform Narcotics Act was the first language that was ever established for cannabis. And states had an optional clause to include that within their Uniform Narcotics Act. Some states passed it, other states didn't, but that language was the framework that actually is now used within the Controlled Substances Act today. So from there, then in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was established using that same Uniform Narcotics Cannabis language. And that really set the stage, moving cannabis away from this kind of open framework into a tax and regulated framework where it put a high dollar amount for physicians, for basically anybody who wanted to grow it, manufacture it, and prescribe it. They had to do a bunch of paperwork. It was taxed and regulated, and slowly that made this movement away from cannabis as a drug and as a pharmaceutical and into more of the narcotic drug scene. After 1937, obviously World War II broke out. There was a lot more focus on that, less focus on an international scene. By the 1950s, the Boggs Act came out in the United States, which really increased your maximum sentences. Cannabis being wrapped up within all of this because of the Marijuana Tax Act. And then by 1961, the Singles Convention occurred on an international level under the United Nations, which really put cannabis in that first Schedule I category as we know it today under the Controlled Substances Act. So that happened in 1961, and then the U.S. adopted that, ratified that in 1967, and then officially put it into national code under the Controlled Substances Act.
So, and let me ask you, why did they pick on cannabis and hemp to begin with, back in the early 1900s, and how did the demonization of blacks and Mexicans come into play?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the billion-dollar question. There's a ton of different conspiracies out there. A lot of people point to William Randolph Hearst and the paper and timber industries, and point to nylon as competitor to hemp rope. Really, I think if you dive into it, William Randolph Hearst did play a role, but it was much more in the media, in that sense of pushing the story of demonization as opposed to really needing it for paper or wanting his timber empire to succeed over hemp as paper. When you start really looking into the usage and the pharmaceutical applications, I think that's really where the role really was. At the time, there was a big shift in science from understanding organic chemistry and understanding ways that we can kind of improve alkaloid chemistry and finding this holy grail for morphine. And cannabis was not characterized as an alkaloid. And so therefore, and at the time it was not grown the way that we grow it today. It was found on riverbanks, and people would just chop it on the riverbanks and throw it into a pile and sell it to Abbott and Eli Lilly, and they always complained about the quality not being controlled. And it's like, well, yeah, you just got it off a riverbank. You didn't like have it under a controlled setting. And so there was a lot of kind of talk about how it was not, there wasn't a lot of reproducibility and whatnot. Now, in the 40s, there was actual very early research showcasing its use against epilepsy. A researcher out of University of Utah or something like that, actually a female researcher, was working with Dr. Lennox, which now we know of as Lennox disease and Epidiolex, and its use for epilepsy. They had actually proved its use back in 1947, 1949, and yet there was still not a big push for it. And a big part of that is because we hadn't isolated the compounds yet. We hadn't synthesized the compounds yet. And we were at a stage in this world where all of this science was moving toward patented medicines. And you can't patent a plant. You can only patent synthetic compounds. And so the fact that we could not isolate and synthesize these compounds, well, that means we can't patent them. And that means we can't make a lot of money off of them and within the pharmaceutical giants of the world. And so because of that, it was kind of an easy way to both kind of push it to the side so we could focus on opioids, but then it also was really a driver to push the drug message forward, in that American culture was kind of this perfect place to live, this perfect place to be. And yet we had these, kind of psychopaths, quote unquote, that were these drug users. And those were the imperfect people, but we could use drugs as a scapegoat to blame them for those imperfections. And pushing the cannabis as a message was a lot easier to kind of pull in the youth and pull in the story and make it a little bit more appealing and scary, because it was something that all these youth had access to, whereas something like heroin was a far larger reach. And of course, they don't want to blame something like alcohol and caffeine, because those were good drugs at the time. You're on mute, John.
I'm on mute. Yeah, those are the drugs that upper crust society would use as well.
Exactly.
And big pharma today still is sort of a competitor in the space and has a big lobby. And it's also unfortunate that research, because cannabis was made illegal, prohibited, a lot of research in the U.S. wasn't done on it. And the tools and the skills to synthesize, or thank goodness, I guess, to break up the cannabis molecule wasn't developed. It's easier to break down opium into the synthetics. But we can wax on this the whole time. Let me bring it a little bit further and bring Mellissa online. So Mellissa, I know you and the DPA have been very much involved in the MRTA, but also working on drug legalization in general. Can you give us a little background on what you guys have been working on for the last 10, 15 years, and what are some of the struggles you're seeing today?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll actually tie it back in with what Annie was just discussing as well, because fundamentally we know that drug policy and drug laws in this country and elsewhere as well, but we're focusing our conversation today on the United States, have never been about the pharmacology of a substance. They've never been about what a drug does in a person's body, the composition of that drug. It's been about the purported population that is using that drug. And I say purported because oftentimes it's not an accurate reflection of the actual demographics of use. But yet it's, drug laws, drug enforcement, drug policy writ large has been used consistently as a tool and as a weaponization of policy against communities and against individuals in this country. And so we see that, kicking off along with the sort of crisis of profitability or lack thereof, or a way to monetize this plant. We also see kind of intertwined with that, and I would argue even more blatantly, this messaging around, particularly targeting the Mexican population, like part of the reason why we refer to it as marijuana in the United States as opposed to cannabis, as is done all around the world, is because it was an effort to really slander and to target Mexican migrant workers in the Southwest in particular during that time period, and to frame that population as problematic, to frame that population as one that was trying to undermine this, perceived notion of what the United States stood for, even though we know consistently this country has fallen far short of what we maintain to be our justice principles. And so we see that carrying all the way through with cannabis policy in this country. The New York specific laws and actions taken around prohibition were really around wanting to try to interrupt and to try to prevent the intermingling of young people and to reinforce segregation in New York State. We see this rise of jazz clubs and people from all across the different boroughs actually coming together, youth being able to build and collaborate with one another and build relationships that really challenge the racist status quo of segregation. And yet, that was the precise moment at which we see the scare tactics and the fear-mongering messaging and narratives really being driven hard. And so that's carried through all the way. So Drug Policy Alliance, coming back to your question, has really been about challenging those fundamental notions. We're the largest organization in the country working to end the drug war and the harm that it's done in communities, and also working to repair that harm and to make sure that people are safe, reaffirming people's dignity and autonomy around what they choose to put in their own bodies, and making sure that our policy decisions are actually grounded in evidence base, are grounded in health and compassion and human rights, and what it means for communities to be able to be healthy and to be safe in a more comprehensive definition of what that actually means. And so in New York, our work goes back more than 20 years at this point, really tracing the arc of working against the Rockefeller drug laws and working on the repeal and Drop the Rock campaign back, from the early 2000s to successfully getting that done in 2009. And then working again to just chip away. Unfortunately, New York State was a leader in a really a demonizing way around drug policy. So we saw that with the Rockefeller drug laws. We saw that with stop and frisk. As we came into a new era, we were a leader in the early days. Shout out to Assembly Member Dick Godfrey, who in his younger days, his early years in the state assembly, pushed for marijuana decriminalization back in 1977, passed that, and yet still, we see the impact of cannabis enforcement in New York, where there's been more than 800,000 arrests for low-level cannabis possession, despite the fact that it was decriminalized during that time. And that really comes down to the broader criminal legal system, the broader enforcement and racist landscape that we were operating within, where stop and frisk came to a rise, where we saw more than 50,000 arrests of young Black and Latinx people, predominantly people under 25 years old, at a critical juncture in their life and their whole future lies ahead of them, basically having so many different avenues of their future just shut off because of this criminalization. So DPA has worked on ending the marijuana arrest crusade in New York. We worked on passing through the Compassionate Care Act, working with patients, working with impacted people to be able to get access to medical cannabis. And yet, I'll spare everybody my rant on it, but the bill in its final version, due to the actions of our former governor, was insufficient to be able to meet the needs of patients. And we saw that decrim wasn't enough. And so all of these things came together to really push us to say, shout out to the vocal leaders as well, the people who are on the front lines experiencing the harms at their most, at the apex. We're like, we need to work on legalization in New York State. Like all of these kind of window dressing, like try to, pass these reforms around the edges, it's not enough. And so we came together with them. We, crafted the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, working really closely with Senator Krueger and now Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes. She was a, not as well-known Assembly member from Buffalo at that time. And, she really brought it through and understood both Senator Krueger and Majority Leader Peoples-Stokes, are not people who consume. They're not people who they'll be the first to tell you, like, I don't think people really should be out here. I think they're learning more of like the medical and the healing components, but we're just like recognizing that this was a grave harm to the New York State, to communities, and that there were such extreme racial disparities in the way that our policies were being enacted on people and the way they were being weaponized at people. So, all of that to say, we've worked on this issue and all drug policy issues for many years, and are really looking at, particularly with the way the Marijuana Justice Campaign came together in New York State and changing the narrative, I think really from a kind of like, should this happen? What could it look like? Into much more of a frame of, this is the policy that will happen. And it's a matter of making sure that it's centered in economic justice and racial justice, that any sort of revenues that come in are reinvested back into the communities most harmed, and that the business side is built around social equity and is built around cooperatives and is built around things that are not just business as usual, since we have this opportunity to really do something differently. So those are the principles that grounded us. Oh, you're muted again, John.
Oh my God, there was a motorcycle going by. But your point about decrim was important. I mean, it was very important component to all this, but it didn't solve the education issue around cannabis. It didn't solve the access to capital issue, which are all, part of building a foundation of a legal system. But I wouldn't say it was window dressing, but it made everybody feel good, but it wasn't enough. And, there's still more to come, and we can talk about that going forward. And as far as the demonization goes, that even goes back to the 1800s and 1900s, because a lot of the people who were funding the research on opioids in cannabis, they were also involved in eugenics and working with the German government to figure out and testing cannabis and other drugs on Blacks and indigents and poor people. So that whole trope goes way back, and I think it's important today that people understand you feel like this is just happening in your neighborhood, but this is a big, huge thing that everybody has to come together and figure out. Lawrence, let's jump to you. You are our man on the inside, our embed. What's going on at the federal level, and what are some of the battles that you're fighting or advocating for in DC?
Woo! It's gonna take me a minute. So, as you know, there are so many bills currently right now trying to be worked on by the Hill, being advocated for by either senators or representatives, trying to make something happen in the world of cannabis. And we want to thank our allies who have been on the pavement, Democrat and Republican, working in order to make something happen. As we all know and has been reported, unfortunately, safe banking has been taken out of the Competes Act. It's unfortunate. However, hope has not completely been lost. So there's something called Safe Plus, kind of like a hybrid that now is a bipartisan bill being worked on. That we'll see where that goes. I'll probably be, helping alongside our industry with that. You still have the MORE Act, which is the bipartisan bill with Representative Joyce and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I usually call her Miss AOC, but I'll just, since we're live, I want to make sure that I at least show that I know the full name.
Give us a couple of bullets on what the SAFE Act is and the MORE Act.
Sure. So safe banking, that act would be to ensure that entrepreneurs in cannabis, whether big companies or small companies, will be able to use the same banking system that every other legitimate business in America is using. For example, I know for a fact that there are some business owners that due to SAFE can't even take equity out on their personal homes. Because once you commingle your personal money with the profits from your business that is a cannabis company, now all of a sudden banks may not want to give you capital in fear that they will be prosecuted by the federal government, because unfortunately, cannabis is still a Schedule I drug, which is ridiculous to me because cannabis is in the same sentence as crack cocaine and heroin, which I know how we got there, so I'm not going to act surprised. No thanks to Anslinger. But because of that, Now, these legitimate companies in states where it is completely legalized are unfortunately unable to do so. They're unable to go and get the capital. They're already unable to get loans, and that impacts communities, Black and brown communities, more because we already have an uphill battle when it comes to getting capital from certain banks and certain companies. So safe banking would be to address that issue. In regards to the MORE Act, the MORE Act would address some banking, but the goal of the MORE Act mostly would be to ensure that these records are expunged from people who have dealt with cannabis crimes, and that they would have the resources available to be able to start their lives from scratch. Now, I understand that, nothing can get back time. I understand that. But ensuring that the rest of the time that somebody may have, they no longer have to worry about consequences of previous actions that are now legal in multiple states. I think about 38, 39 states have whether it's an adult use or a medical program at this point. Yeah. So most of America is somewhat agreeing with the use of cannabis. And the MORE Act would address, just expunging those records. There are other bills from Senator Rosen that would allow cannabis companies to access small business loan programs. That's important for our small business entrepreneurs. There's the CAO Act that we're currently waiting on from Senators Booker, Schumer, and Wyden. We're still waiting for the results of that, which is supposed to be a comprehensive bill. And then aside from all of that, there's also all of these little movements to try to incorporate some cannabis bills into existing bills that are being pushed through. And, it's just an issue that incorporates everybody. It's an issue that incorporates social equity. It incorporates the safety of our neighborhoods. When you, unfortunately, because you're unable to bank, you got to keep a lot of cash on hand, which means now that we are creating targets for communities. That's a cash only business. We can go hit that and do what we have to do there. That's what some criminals may think. And then, like I said before, just recently about, having access to capital, the prohibition of cannabis on a federal level impacts so many things and affects so many people's lives in so many ways. So that's just a few of the ways that we're advocating. Also, just in regards to the CBD aspect of it. The FDA isn't regulating CBD currently at the moment due to the fact that they passed Epidiolex, which is a drug that includes CBD in it. And now because of that, the FDA said that there's no prior use exception, and now the FDA isn't regulating CBD products. Now, CBD products are all around, right? You can go to your local gas station and get some CBD, and it's beneficial and it's a help, but the American citizen needs and deserves to understand what are in these products, and that's where the FDA can come in and regulate on that. But, I'm not going to put words in the FDA's mouth. Of course, that's not what I'm in the business in, but I am in the business of understanding things. And I do understand that due to the previous views of cannabis will lead people from multiple generations to kind of slowly push forward. Even if somebody understands just it's human nature to be stubborn when you're so stuck in learning something. The previous generation before mine was the don't say no, was the just say no. Was the Nancy Reagan, the war on drugs in a sense. I'm sorry about that. See, that's how I know I'm getting too deep in the conversation. But
your cookies ready?
Yeah, but that's just, I understand a lot of people come from that generation. So now when they're making decisions, they have to just say no, the DARE campaign, the DARE lion. We all remember the mascot for the DARE campaign. They have that in the back of their mind. So we understand it's an uphill battle. And one of my mentors told me that the goal in order to make things happen is educate, advocate, legislate. And that's the business that I'm in, whether it be on the state level or the federal level. And Andy, I'd love to hear some of your input. I know I brought up some hemp and I know I brought up some banking and I saw your eyes light up. So I would actually love to hear why your eyes lit up and your thoughts on that as well. Because just as much as I'm here to talk, I'm also here to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that you mentioned, Lawrence, was very on point. And I think something that people don't realize is that the Safe Banking Act doesn't just impact cannabis, it impacts hemp. And that even though hemp is no longer a federally controlled narcotic, we still have just as bad of banking problems as the cannabis industry does. We do have an easier time getting access to banks actually taking our money, but we still have problems finding merchant processing. I've been going through an issue recently where I'm having to prove all of this stuff, and there's all of these made up rules as to why a bank would need certain things on your website that have no impact at all to whether or not something is legal or safe or whatever, but they're just these kind of fictitious things that they think will make things less risky. And so passing the Safe Banking Act or passing things that give these protections not only helps cannabis, but it really helps hemp, and it especially helps the small businesses within the hemp industry. And it's so important to get this bill or something like it passed on a federal level.
Yeah, of course, it trickles down further to the Black and brown communities who are most impacted anyway, because you don't have access to capital. You necessarily don't have a trust fund or live in proximity to a hedge fund guy you can reach over and get private capital from. So now it's legal, but I can't do anything. It's that whole tautology that people of color have experienced for a long time. But actually, I do know a farmer here in New York who grew hemp. He got his conditional license to go and grow cannabis. He's actually a well-off gentleman, but his mortgage is with Farm Credit East. So on his 200 acres, he can't even grow now on his own farm, even though he has a license from New York State to do it. So what did he do? He had the ability to go find a property somewhere else with a favorable bank to get a mortgage on that. And usually banks, correct me if I'm wrong, they're going to be banks like community banks or credit unions and so forth who are not FDIC insured, right? So it's a mixed bag here. But go ahead, Mellissa. Sorry.
Sure, but I think there's just a willing, like there are ways to navigate it. It's just a really onerous process. And so a lot of the larger institutions are like, it's not worth our time to have to flag every single interaction as a possible FinCEN violation. It's not worth our time to have to hold all these assets separately to make sure there's absolutely nothing that touches. But some of the smaller institutions and credit unions in particular have been really clear that this is part of their mission. As communities serving financial entities, they've taken this upon themselves to say, we need to actually provide banking services. We need to provide, I think it's been a tougher row to hoe because they don't have as many assets to be able to do the lending services. And that's really a huge piece of the puzzle. But I think what you're raising, John and everybody, is super important, that it's important to move this forward and to be able to get this level of access. And we know that in and of itself isn't going to be enough to change the systemic issues that are involved within the financial industry. It's an uphill battle, even in sectors that are legal. And so being able to put in place real serious guardrails within legislation that passes, and then have the implementation accountability behind that to make sure that it is actually getting lending for people who have been impacted in communities of color all across the country, and not just, kind of sounding good on a slogan, but really having like the substance behind it is what's so key. And that's been the hard nut to crack at this point.
You also have, your big banks like Chase Bank. I mean, it's a little bit against their other investments, which are investments in loans into private prisons. So, cannabis on one side, no, not so much. We'd prefer to be on this, legal area where we imprison people and, keep them there as.
See, I do think, and this is a personal thing, this is my personal thoughts. I do think that once cannabis becomes federally legal, we're bringing in about $63 billion a year right now as a market. The market is too big for banks to just say, we don't want to do it. I really, truly believe that the hurdle is making sure it's federally legalized. So not only that the capital can come from the big banks, but also trading on the stock market. It's hard to navigate trading on the stock market for the American stock market and having something federally legal, so they really can't participate in that market if they're doing THC. Multiple Americans want to, get a bunch of stocks in certain companies and things of that nature, but they can't. So it's impeding even American investorship at this point. This problem and this federal kind of prohibition still, which is aged by years at this point. California started their medical, I think, in about the early 90s. Yeah, the early 90s. So, it's really just impeding American innovationship. It's really impeding American innovation. It's impeding American growth. It's impeding the economic growth. It's impeding personal growth. Like even, for example, there's certain bills that are put in place. There's certain bills now that are advocating for being able to test current cannabis products on the market federally. And that's important because there's not even a national thing to test that. We don't know everything that's going in people's body. We don't know everything now. I know a lot of the companies and a lot of the growers, do good manufacturing practices, and they, process things as if it is being reviewed. But at the same time, we can't even come up with innovation to test products that exist to try to create something better.
Right.
That's federally illegal at the moment. Certain things have changed. Now you can grow on more bases due to the farm bill that came out that addressed a lot of hemp and CBD issues. But as far as we've come with 38 states having some type of cannabis program, with the bills that have expanded but not completely expanded innovation and research, and just with the lack of SAFE and the lack of other platforms and other things that other legitimate businesses have, it really just impedes American innovation at this point. And for a plant that is seemingly magical, that can do so much for so many people, it's just unfortunate that we are having to fight this uphill battle still. However, the war is still to go, and I think that eventually we will win the war, I guess, against prohibition now. It transitioned from the war on drugs to the war against the prohibition. So I've been blessed to have the opportunity to be involved in the space and to be an advocate and to work with Kronos and to continue to fight for, an equitable, federally legalized cannabis industry.
Well, Lawrence, thank you for the segue. We're going to be running out of time soon. I think we've been forever. No, it's okay. So I want to wrap up a bit. Lawrence touched upon it. For Annie and Mellissa, what do you think for you guys and what you do? What are the challenges ahead, and what do we need to stay vigilant on here? And how do we push forward? Who wants to go first?
I can jump in. I mean, I think for me, it's really a matter of looking at all of the additional devastating impacts that the drug war and that cannabis prohibition has had across people's lives. Like, we can stop arrest, which we've largely done now in New York in terms of legalizing adult use. But that doesn't mean that the mom who had her child custody revoked because of simply testing positive for cannabis, no harm whatsoever done, but that family is ripped apart, right? It doesn't change the person who got deported because of a low-level cannabis arrest 10 years ago that just popped back up. It doesn't change the person who wasn't able to access those loans for college to be able to get their higher education and the economic toll that that's taken in communities. So I think for me, it's really looking at how do we be as comprehensive in our solutions, both on the policy sense, but also on the implementation side, as the damage and the harm that's been done. Because you're right, John, like, we can't get that time back. But at the same time, we have to focus on being able to build out strategically in ways that are going to anticipate the barriers that people have already had to confront and try to move forward through, and also do everything possible and be as intentional as we possibly can to build out new policy that's going to take all of this into account and be, really mindful of the ways in which we can offer restitution to people for that damage. And that means reinvesting in communities. That means building out policies in ways that are very laser focused on being able to help the people who had been blocked out in every previous sense. But I think it means being more expansive in our visioning and in our dreaming as well, like not just being limited to the ways in which the drug war logic and drug war thinking for so long has kind of, just put the damper on this space and on people and communities, but really, going big and swinging for the hills when we're talking about what we can do instead of that. Because I think people need that energy, people need that motivation, that fire right now, especially with all the headwinds that we're facing. So I'm really clinging to that in the work that we're doing.
No, it's a big problem. You need a big solution for it. Annie, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I mean, Mellissa, I think everything that you said was very much on point. I mean, I think it also, though, we have to remember that it's not necessarily just about cannabis. This is about the war on drugs, the war on prohibition, and the need to really look at this issue not as a drug problem, but as a mental health crisis, and that we need to approach it in that manner to help people in the future to get through these problems, to get people out of jail, to create these comprehensive packages, but also ones that will pass. I mean, we are in such a stalemate in Congress. It's absolutely incredible. And just knowing that there's so much work still to be done. I mean, congratulations to New York for having such a really good legislation that went through. I'm from Kentucky. We'll probably be 49th, 50th. It might be in 20 years from now. I hope not. But there is just so much more work to be done. And I think that as a group, we can get it done. Be patient and just don't give up.
You got to talk to Mitch down there. You know, I think you guys are the kickoff panel for the summit. I think you've all been excellent, and you really set the stage for something for people who are entering into this space. You can come in it for business, but you just have to have much more than that, don't you think? You have to understand a mission. You have to understand there's, karma. You have to just come in it for more than just to make money, because I think that won't get you that much further, because there's just so many other things that have gone on in the past and will continue to go on. So I've got to wrap up, and thank you, Lawrence, Mellissa, and Annie. You're welcome to come back anytime. This has been very informational for me and hopefully for our audience as well. Thank you for participating.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Fossil Prod.
This is the original instrumental.
Hey everybody, we're back.
Hey, how you doing,
Hello,
Tanya?
hello. I wasn't here before. You're like, who the heck is that?
Well, they need to know who you are, because you're the person who is just making all this technical stuff happen behind the scenes from day one. So Tanya Osborne at Women Grow, welcome.
Hey, Tanya Osborne from Women Grow. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad everyone is here and enjoying. There's a lot of feedback in the chat, so that is awesome. So I'm going to leave you guys to do your thing. That last panel was fantastic, and then you can set up the next one.
Sure. Tamika, you back with us?
I am here, and hopefully technology is on my side at the moment. It was just a phenomenal panel that you moderated, John, and they made so many important and impactful statements, and you have to know where you're coming from to know where you're trying to go, right? So everything from barriers to capital, to which is the plight of all business owners, but really a huge plight when it comes to accessing capital in the cannabis industry, and how to be creative and think outside the box, and just those challenges and the barriers that people of color especially are still going through to this day in trying to create equity and access. And equality isn't always equity. And so we have to have a deeper understanding of that. And anyone who enters into the cannabis business really should have that as a heart and focus of the mission itself. Even if you are somebody who is privileged, to just really make sure that you reinvest into people who've been disproportionately marginalized. So thank you so much for hosting that phenomenal panel. And I think that the next panel is going to be equally as exciting, and it's going to address the cultivation strategies. And it's one of the panels that's near and dear to my heart, because it's so important to get these key strategic ways to cultivate cannabis, because it is a little bit of a testy plant.
No, absolutely. And we have two really fantastic growers in the region to talk about strategies and challenges and what you can expect if you're interested in growing cannabis. And we also have the co-executive director from the Hudson Valley AgriBusiness Development Corp to talk about ways to tap into financing and grants and other things to help you get off the ground as an emerging farmer. So we'll launch that right now.
Fossil Prod.
This is an original instrumental.
And we have an exciting panel for you today called Strategies. We have brought together some really smart people in the space who have significant experience on the cultivation side and also working with farmers. We're going to talk to you about their experience in getting their businesses off the ground and some of the challenges you might face as an aspiring grower. New York State, along with Connecticut and New Jersey, kicked off their adult use licensing programs in 2022. New York State, for example, just closed its adult use conditional cultivation licensing program. It's a mouthful for hemp farmers. There have been some 250 applications submitted with over 180 farms that have been approved for cultivation of cannabis. Sometime in the first quarter, we believe, first quarter of 2023, the application program will be expanded for the general market. If you are not a hemp farmer, this is probably the program for you if you want to be a cultivator. So we do expect to see a lot of interest in this space, but the question is, what does it take to get a cultivation business off the ground and position it for success? So let's turn to our panel. I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves and give a little bit of background about your business, and then we can launch into some Q&A and discussion. So I'd like to start off with Lou, John, and then Mary Ann. Welcome, Lou.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Luis Vega. I am the CEO of Wepa Hemp Farms, as well as now the CEO of Nautilus Botanicals, a full-scale THC facility in Connecticut. Very excited about everything that's going on. And today we'll be able to go over a little bit how I got started, how I transitioned from hemp into full-scale cannabis, and some of the roadblocks that I've hit. So I'm really excited to share this information and have this conversation going today. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you. John?
Hi, I'm John Ang with the Aeterna Cannabis. We used to be a New York hemp service. Again, we started, similar to Lewis, we started as a hemp farm, and we're lucky to transition to cannabis and with this first round of licenses. And yeah, we've been operating as a hemp farm for about 4 years now. But with the change in regs, we'll probably only be focusing on cannabis from this point on.
Great. I should mention, I just should note that both of you guys are or were previous or hemp farmers, CBD hemp farmers to start off with. So we'll get back to that. Marianne?
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Ann Johnson. I am the Deputy Director of Hudson Valley AgriBusiness Development Corporation. We are a nonprofit based in the Hudson Valley, and we cover 8 counties. And we are the only economic development agency solely focused on agriculture and ag-related, ag-dependent businesses such as local food and/or local hemp and hopefully THC processing at some point. We do this work in a variety of ways, which I'll get into in a little bit when we get back to it. But over time, we've helped over 275 businesses, and we do focus on the viability of the business and the importance of making sure you have the proper structure and the plans in place to be successful.
Great, thank you. So as we just mentioned, both John and Luis are hemp farmers or were hemp farmers. I don't know, you have to tell me where you are in transition. And, you know, the hemp business was a pretty exciting business. It sort of leveled down a little bit, but I still think, you know, CBD is not going to go away. But is there a difference in growing hemp versus cannabis? Have you identified that yet? Who wants to take that one first? And if you're growing outdoor or indoor, greenhouse and all that stuff.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that first. And of course, the main difference is really is price point, and what that really is your confinement on what you can and cannot do with hemp versus cannabis. Of course, you know, you're talking about a product that's you know, a few dollars versus something that's, you know, a few $1,000s, and you really have to change your you know, change your thinking. Of course, you know, we do this probably, and myself probably started off in a better way that we get used to working with hemp and then go to working with cannabis is a much better path than the other way around, I guess. But with those constraints, with that major constraint, you have to look at this very, very vastly different in terms of what you can do, what you should be doing. One is really you're looking at mass production and versus cannabis, where you're looking at you're trying to achieve higher quality and then mass. Right?
John,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Luis, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna piggyback off of that. I guess that transition is a little bit up to what you're looking to do. We run about 100 acres of CBD, so hemp for CBD extraction, and then we do about another 200 acres for hemp for fiber extraction. So they're grown completely different. The amount of plants in an acre is completely different. One, we're doing 10,000 plants for fiber extraction. They're just long, slinky. They look like bamboo, and they kind of keep, they have like one bud up at the top, and that's realistically it. And then what we do for cannabinoid extraction is, 10 by 10. The soil's treated really much better. It's still large scale production, and that's outdoor. And then what you do indoors is completely different. But as John was stating, that price point is a big thing. If you look at your square footage when you're growing for cannabis, you value that 5x5 square so much more than you do your 5x5 square for a hemp plant. And then the amount of work that you put into it and the available resources that can go into that 5x5 square is a little higher as well. So you're not going to necessarily look to do total, at least in our region for agriculture. You're not going to look to do full scale cannabis as sun grown as your main production. That might be great for extraction, and this is kind of where the HVADC comes in, where processing and the regulatory side of that comes in. But transitioning from hemp into full scale cannabis is an adventure in its own, and it's starting to hone in into your skills. So regulation becomes way larger of the process, and usually taking that agricultural mindset and forcing it into the cannabis mindset is a transition itself.
Right, and I think a lot of people are also thinking they can take maybe what they've learned on the West Coast and bring it to the East Coast as far as cannabis production goes. But that's a little bit of a fallacy too, because you have weather difference, climate differences, different pests. I mean, the whole soil differences as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge aspect. A tomato farmer will tell you the same thing. When you start going into agriculture, it's what regions we're in. There's a couple different regions that are separated by your farmer's almanac. And, we start thinking cannabis as an agricultural crop, and we have to start relating it to agriculture. A lot of times we take the indoor mentality, and it kind of goes, we're taking this plant out of the basement and into a greenhouse now, where it can really flourish. So that everything's different based on what region you're in. If you're in middle America, if you're in southern region, if you're in northern region, every grow style is going to be completely different.
Are you growing greenhouse indoor?
So I grow full scale cannabis indoor only, and then we do hemp in greenhouse, hoop houses, and then out in the field for different reasons. So like the things that we grow in the greenhouses are way better suited for flower production. So things that would go into pre-rolls, things that would be packaged into jars, things that can enter the medical market a little bit easier. In Connecticut, hemp farmers are able to sell some of their product to the full-scale THC producers, but they have to pass all the same regulatory standards as the full-scale THC. So it can't be something that's grown outdoors. We have to grow that in a greenhouse setting. And then flower that we would grow in our fields are mostly for biomass, for mass extraction, for either CBD, CBG, or we set it aside and age it for CBN.
Cool. John, and I forgot to ask you, John, how did you get into the business?
Oh, you know the story. I came as a most indirect road you could possibly get around to get the cannabis is the way I feel like the path we took. But really, our company started as a fish farm here in the Hudson Valley. About 8 years ago, 2014, we acquired this property, and with the idea to build a fully commercial scale land-based fish farm to address a lot of the demand and issues with our current seafood production. In that, aquaponics has always been on our drawing board and in my mind, but different from other aquaponic operations, we did not start with produce or leafy green side and then add fish to it. We went about kind of the opposite way, where we wanted a commercial scale fish farm first, and then go into our produce once we have that established. And in that path, we got our fish farm up and running and kind of stable by 2016 and 17, at just about the time New York enacted their hemp regs and licensing. So at that time, hemp was really the kind of the, I guess, the cat's meow of the agricultural world, and that was really an opportunity I couldn't look away from, considering all the possibilities back then. We kind of jumped into hemp farming with our first grow in 2018. What's unique with some of our facilities here at the Hudson Valley Fisheries and New York Hemp Service, beyond the connection to the fish farm and the ability to utilize our waste streams from the fish farm, is that we have plenty of acreage. We really have three methods of growing hemp and or cannabis. We have indoor facilities, greenhouses, as well as a significant acreage outside for that sun grown. And since our start, we've tried all three methodologies for growing hemp. We built out our indoor facilities as a mother and cloning facility, as well as some indoor growing. And then we have two greenhouses, of which we renovated one, approximately 80,000 square feet. And then we have 100 acres to work with, but I think we've only grown we've only grown about 7 acres outdoors. Really only focused on the smokable market, not so much for the extraction market. And to me, at that time, it really was experimentation, learning, and basically optimization. Having these facilities gave us abilities to really kind of hone in on best practices for all three methodologies. Mm-hmm.
Great. So currently, though, what are the restrictions, I guess you can call it, for growing in New York State under the conditional program?
So under the conditional program right now, you're really only allowed a greenhouse, outdoor, or a hybrid of both. So if you're focused on outdoor, it's an acre of canopy. Indoor greenhouse, indoor, greenhouse only, it's about 25,000 square foot of canopy. Or the hybrid of the two, which is 10,000 square foot of outdoor growing and 20,000 square feet of greenhouse. Now, looking at our focus, what we did here at the New York Hemp Service, or now Aeterna Cannabis, is that we have a much larger greenhouse than the allotted canopy. So I kind of focused all of that allotment to the greenhouse. But thinking back, I think it behooves you to actually consider spacing your canopy out as much as you can in the space you're allowed. And I could still, if I chosen the 20,000 square foot of canopy for greenhouse, I could space that across as much as I want in our greenhouse, and then still get 10,000 acres or 10,000 square foot of outdoor growing at the same time. I think there's some strategy there that I think is worth really thinking about.
John, may I ask,
Sure.
what do you feel is the advantage of doing both the greenhouse and the outdoor?
Really, the outdoor, you want to focus on really for the extraction market. I know 10,000 square foot isn't a lot when you're saying you could have a full acre, but 10,000 square foot, you can still squeeze a lot of plants in, and it may be an ideal start for a good farmer, for people to get their feet wet in that, I I don't think you can compare doing 10,000 square feet to like 100 acres, or 200 acres of what Lewis is doing. That's full. What Lewis is doing is fully. I imagine you're talking mechanized a bit. You're gonna have tractors.
It's a little different.
A lot
There's
of
some tractors involved, and our extraction equipment is a little bit bigger. That's also where that transition comes in, because we're transitioning from production style hemp to more of a craft grow, because cannabis, no matter which way you do it, indoor, outdoor, hybrid, it's all craft. You're taking a lot more care of these plants. You're really taking way more attention to what's going on. You're putting in a lot more time. When we've got 100 acres, we're not taking complete care of every single plant. Everything's on a schedule. It's pretty mechanized. I'm not going through and defanning leaves. When we're drying them, we're drying in a silo. You know what I mean? It's not the craft humidity controlled room that you're gonna dry your full scale cannabis in. A lot of the stuff gets grounded down, pelletized, and then pushed through the machines. You have 100 liters of stuff going through, and at any given time is not what you're doing on the cannabis side. You take way more care. We had to re-outfit everything. We had to downsize some items. So where our 250 liter evaporator, we downsized that to like a 20 liter evaporator, so everything becomes much more specialized, takes a little bit more time, and the quality of product that's going to go out there is very superior to what you can usually grab on in other methods. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. That makes a lot of sense. And Mary, I want to get to you in a second, because you already can see that there's a lot of moving parts. There's equipment, there's buildings. You're going to need some capital. And I want to know how HVAC can be helpful in that. But just even when you're starting to think about this, is it important to think about what kind of cannabis you want in the end? Because you also mentioned extraction versus smokable cannabis, and they're different. It's a different quality, a different sort of growth style. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that's a huge thing. A lot of times, and John, maybe you can agree with me, genetics play a huge part in everything that you do.
Yeah. So far, I've agreed with everything you said, Louis. It's actually, and I'm so impressed you're taking that route where you're doing such large volumes on 3 different methodologies. What I've found is you're exactly right. If you're talking about the craft market, every plant is important, right? You focus your attention on every single plant, because you have a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand of it. But you do mass production, you talk about hundreds of acres, you're talking about tens, if not hundreds of thousands of plants, and there's no one you could focus attention like you would on every single plant as you do in a craft business. So to that start, and kind of to answer your question, John, is you look at this as I look at it as almost two different types of businesses. Your cost structure is very different. Where one is maybe nutrients and equipment costs, the other is lots of labor, or both require a lot of labor, but your energy costs are different in proportion. Your finishing is different. Your facilities that you acquire maybe will definitely differ. So you kind of have to approach it in 2 different manners. It's not to say that one is more profitable than the other, but I think it's 2 different businesses.
Right.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, and equipment cost. So I guess my background, I started straight up mom and pop. I was in another industry. My grandfather was a farmer in Puerto Rico. Came back out this way. I got sick. I didn't really feel my corporate style of life was really going to be what I was going to end up at my end goal. So I ended up readapting what my grandfather was doing and went back into agriculture. I cashed out my 401k. There was like 200,000 in it. And I went all in. Hemp farming was not successful. It is an expensive endeavor that doesn't do much. I reached out to the Minority Farmers Alliance, Minority Cannabis Business Association, every one of the affiliate groups, every one of the agricultural groups. Farmland Trust helped me out a lot. Minority Farmers helped me out a lot. I went to the our Department of Agriculture, was able to connect me with a bunch of different programs that helped out small minority farmers, and we were able to start our program. So year and a half in, I applied for some cannabis business accelerators and accelerator programs, added product value programs. These are all things that come from the agricultural side that a lot of times people don't know on the economic development or manufacturing or sales side. So as we start to push forward and know that this crop is a crop and it should be treated like agriculture, you start to look for some of those traditional funding methods. And the great thing that happened is, hey, with hemp, we were able to get some of those traditional funds. So I won the I2 Accelerator through the Minority Cannabis Business Association, and that provided me some mentorship and some more capital to buy some more equipment, move into more processing. And then the biggest thing is now you have to start thinking, what are your distribution channels? A lot of times in agriculture, there's regional buyers for a lot of the things that you would make, that you would grow. If you do added product value, you can actually sell them at your locations if you get certain certifications. And we had to start looking at some of these traditional methods of agriculture and integrating hemp into it, even though I started as a hemp farmer looking to integrate the traditional methods in. So it was kind of backwards, similar to what John was saying. John started with his fishery and then integrated hemp. And I just see how this works. You have such a symbiotic relationship there, man. There's a product on the market called fish poop. And like in the world of agriculture, we all love fish poop. And that is the one thing that does great with plants, and you have an unlimited supply of it. So
you're right about that. There's no shortage of poop on this farm, I'll tell you.
Well, I want to let's put fish poop on the side. I do want to get back to that because there is a sustainability story, I believe, on John's farm.
Yes,
and also when you start thinking about setting up your farm, I believe, you have to have some sustainability. You have to. We'll get to brand and angle, but you have to have that some angle, and maybe sustainability is the angle. Maybe it's the social equity push, but we can come back to that. But I want to get to Marianne. So Lou just went through the traps to get to access various programs to get stuff going, and I suspect most people in this space will have to do that. How can HVADC help? And I know you also work closely with the Empire State Development Corporation as well, but how does HVADC enter into this system?
So, Lou, we would love to have you over here to help you in New York. It would be awesome or I wish we could cover Connecticut. So we can help by providing that level of service that Lou got from a variety of organizations, right through HVADC. We work with a bunch of third-party service providers. So, and it doesn't matter if it's hemp or cannabis or if it's dairy or if it's vegetables or fruit. Farming has to be considered a business, and it needs to be considered a viable business. And in order to get there, you need to have, certain things in place. Oftentimes, people come into farming because their family were farmers, their grandparents were farmers, like Lou said. Some of them are entrepreneurs like John that see an opportunity and want to take it. And so what we do is we provide the basics. We help someone get a business plan. We help someone understand the market potential of their product. We help people promote their products, and we can help finance agricultural businesses and ag-related, ag-dependent businesses. In late 2019, actually the last day of 2019, we became an intermediary lender for Empire State Development. And so we were able to add a loan fund. And since that time, we've closed on 4 loans. And those loans have been used for working capital. Those loans have been used for equipment. The catch with our loans, though, is, we do expect them to be paid back, right? So that's where the business plan comes in, the market study, your financial projections. And so we try to wrap those services into getting the business to be profitable and sustainable and hopefully a long-term business.
So, but not all, correct me if I'm wrong, not all equipment or machinery used for the service is financeable, right? I mean, like tractors are hard to get done. It's usually stuff that's sort of nailed down and can't be moved. How does that work?
It is sort of stuff that's nailed down and can't be moved because the loans do require, a level of securitization. However, there are other means, and we can help folks identify other potential capital sources for them. So we work with local banks. We work with local economic development agencies. We're located here in Columbia County. We work very closely with their economic development agency, and they have a loan fund. We work with some of the federal partners, Farm Service Agency, the USDA.
Yeah.
So there's ways for us to help connect people if we aren't able to be the ones to do the financing.
And your sort of regional coverage is maybe 6 to 9 counties along the Hudson River?
We have 8 counties along the Hudson River. So, and if you're not in one of our counties, we would try to match you up with a partner that can help you if it's not us.
Yeah, I won't do the geography lesson of naming all the counties, but you can look at that on the map.
Well, I got to say that as much as Marianne stressed the finance part, I think as a beneficiary of HVADC, I think your greatest help goes way beyond helping with financing. Licensing connections are in my mind so much just as important as the funding, and HVADC has helped immensely, incalculable. I can't understate that enough. To me, as a new business in the area, without 5, 6, 7 generations being here, making the right connections was really just invaluable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, John.
John, I think that's how I met you, actually, through
It's exactly that. It's exactly
about 4 or 5 years ago, and I do consulting in the area, and I met John, and we work on some projects together, and he's got a great operation going. So, Marianne, though, where does AFT come in? I think Lou even mentioned American Farmland Trust. Where can they be a player?
So, American Farmland Trust here in New York does a program called, hang on, I'm going to get it right, Farmland for a New Generation in New York. And they started this program in 2018 because the farmers in our region or in the state are, getting up there in age a little bit. So the average age is in the late 50s. And so we need to be thinking about what's the next generation of farmers that are going to take over this land and use it for production purposes. So they've done that in 2 ways. They've started a regional navigator program, and HVADC is one of those regional navigators. And through that, we're helping people get on the land. So, hang on, let me just stop my phone from ringing.
People are calling you already.
They're calling you. They're not even aired yet. They're calling. So to help people get on the land, we can, and HVADC can do this kind of work as well. Help with reviewing leases and negotiations so that non-farmland owners can help new generation farmers get on the land. And it's important for those people who own the farms and maybe don't want to farm it to understand what it means to have an active and live farm operating on your property. They have a website where you can sign up and you can say, hey, I'm a farmer and I'm looking for land and this is what I want to do. And then if you have land, you can sign up and say, I have land. Here's what you can do on this land. They do workshops. As a regional navigator, we did a workshop in January on succession planning. So trying to help current farmers think about, what's the future going to be? Is this land and is this business going to be transferred to a younger generation? Is it going to be transferred to a trusted employee who's maybe been with you for a while and you want to, see if you can make that leap from you retiring to them taking over? This particular program that we're doing here is also part of our regional navigator. And, we need to give a shout out to American Farmland Trust for helping us to be able to do this program today. And the other thing that they do in this program is networking events. So we will get people together, whether it's service providers, so we understand who else is out there and how we can partner with them. And this service provider list and this regional navigator program runs from Cornell Cooperative Extensions, which can help on the production side, to land trusts, who can help with perhaps conservation easements or helping with transitions from, you know, a older generation to a younger generation. And then just general technical assistance like HVADC does. So providing access to legal and finance and connections, as John mentioned. John's he's a poster child for us.
Well, it sounds like
I'm super excited. So my family's in Warwick Valley, in New York. I don't know where that is in relation to you guys, but that's usually where we're at.
Oh, well, that's good to know, Lou. I'd love to meet you there.
Yeah,
that's Orange County.
That's Orange County, yes.
Oh, yeah.
One of our counties. We're not doing geography, but that is one of our counties.
Yeah, that is.
Oh, it is. Awesome. Yeah. So
it sounds like there's a lot of legwork to do up front, important legwork to do up front. And fortunately, there is time before the applications roll out in the end of the year, beginning of next year. A lot of legwork to done before you even start. And it's still a very noble business, a very valued business, an important business for the state, not only for the cannabis program, it seems like, but just for preserving land and helping with the carbon footprint and all the other things, which is another panel on sustainable farming, regenerative farming. But I do, so let's say you're fortunate enough to be able to get started and you have stuff lined up. And I'm going to go back to our growers here. What should my farm look like? Right? It's not just, let's say you have a greenhouse, it's just not the greenhouse. You're not going to just get some seeds and put in the greenhouse. There's a lot of components going into getting a product, something from seed to be ready to be distributed. What does my farm look like?
That's farm planning. That's where you want to start deciding what you want to do. How much do you want to grow? Where do you want to grow? Let's say we have just a 10,000 square foot hoop house we're looking to convert over. First things first, we want to make sure the thing gets completely cleaned. What type of ground or floor, or are you looking to grow on tables or benches, or you have to start making all those type of decisions. You know, how are you going to do irrigation? How are you going to do fertigation? It's a case by case process. But if you're looking to start something up, get yourself a hoop house, a couple tables. You want to make sure the place is absolutely sanitary. Get some fertigation in there. They sell a couple different computer systems, and you can plug that all in and then get that all started. Decide what type of nutrients you're going to use and what type of medium. Say you're just going to pump out something with like Aeterna and cocoa core on some tables. You get the nutrient line. You get the program. You make sure the place is sanitary. Obviously, this is after all your licensing and everything. You're literally this is just what the hoop house would look like. And then you start setting up where you want your plant placements to go and your irrigation lines. And all this stuff sounds really quick as I'm saying it, but each one of those processes takes a little while.
Yeah, you make it sound like so easy. Just throw some plants in the ground. You're there. No, I think both of us had to learn a very hard way.
Probably can do it in his sleep, but he doesn't get much. He doesn't get much sleep.
I don't sleep very often at all. But this week we took. So we still do cloning by hand. I propagate clones by hand right into little peak cubes, and every week we do about 1,000 abs. Yeah, we and they're popular, and it's a great plant. We just do little ones. We cut the top off, cut everything super symmetric, and every one of those clones comes out very, very, very similar. But that's time. Everything is labor intensive, super labor intensive.
Are those clones your special genetics, your own genetics, or?
Yeah, I was able to play with a couple things, and I actually ran through, and we run one line for extraction. It's a heavy resin producing plant that's been crossed back with some old school strains like Cinderella 99 and the White Widow and like those White Rhinos. They were heavier hash plants. that produce more resin glands for extraction. So that's my one little pet project. Other than that, we run tried and true genetics through some of the larger companies, Humboldt Farms, Ethos. Who else do we run stuff from? Jinx, just a whole bunch of different groups of. It's fun to do plants. It was my hobby as a kid. I was one of those guys who got arrested for growing weed. So
now it's payback, right?
It was my probation officer hated when I showed him where I was. He was like, "Can you get a job?" I was like, "I got a master's degree, but I was arrested for growing weed. McDonald's doesn't want to hire me. I have an MBA in organizational management." And McDonald's was like, "You were growing weed, buddy. That's not happening." And that's why we're very happy with some of the laws that did come by and that social equity function that kind of helps it. But yeah, I went from 16 years old. This was my hobby. My grandfather wanted to beat the skin off my back every time he found the plant in the back. So now, bless, everything's okay and life is good. And now it's, what do you do for a living, sir? Well, I grow this very magical plant and I dedicated my entire life to it.
Yeah, but sometimes you still get that side eye from folks like, yeah, okay, buddy, whatever. But John, so your farm, I know, you have a grow area, but there are other components. You need a veg room, you need a curing space. You need a storage space. Is that correct? You have to think about this configuration because you just can't do it all in one hoop house.
No, I think we were a little bit lucky or fortuitous in kind of having all the tools we do have. But for anyone starting, I think you start with what you got, and think through the process. Don't just think through, I got a patch of dirt I can grow in, or I got a greenhouse I can do. But you got to think all the way through to what happens when you take those plants down. Where are you going to dry it? Where are you going to cure it? Where are you going to trim it? Those are every bit as important. Some part of our learning in our first years. We grew a lot and then didn't have the space, the manpower, or the equipment to deal with it, right? If there's anything I want you guys to know before to get started, is to make sure you think through your process all the way through, including where you end up selling it. That's probably the most important thing. Is having a home for it, or having someone to pay you for it is probably the most important thing. But at the very least, start with what you got, and then build it from there. But try to understand as much as the process as you can.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And New York is presenting a unique situation now because the retail market is not set and the distribution market is not set, but yet farmers are growing right now. So, some farmers may have a crop for the end of the year, but there's no established dispensary market yet. And the state is working on that now with a conditional dispensary license. So that means you might have to hold your stuff, right?
Yes. Luckily, we have refrigeration on site. So that's gonna help a bit in holding some of our product. Hopefully for only a little while. But yeah, you're right, John. That's something that's kind of keeping me up at night. As I think that as fast as the state is moving, I think I got a coin flip's chance of having retailers by end of the year ready and doors open, ready to sell, ready to buy my product. I think that's a coin flip there.
Yeah, but that's also, when you're thinking through the process, you have to think about unforeseen circumstances. You might not be able to move the stuff off of your property quick enough. So I need a place that's secure. Number one, that can store my stuff, doesn't turn brown, which obviously undercuts all of your economics. So those are contingencies I think you have to think about. We're coming up on our time limit here, but I'd like to get your thoughts on what will make you successful in the long term. I mean, you have to have good product. Is having a brand going to be important? I mean, how do you distinguish yourselves in this marketplace? Because you do have a legacy market that's still thriving in many of these regions, and then you're going to have like in New York, there are 180 farms right now. They're trying to grow. Connecticut is fewer farms, but it's still going to be competitive when the MSOs come in. How do you stand out in this?
So what I would always tell everybody is just do the right thing. If you have character of yourself and character in your company, and you are a good corporate citizen and you're a good civil community member, that will speak volumes. Of course, the branding, all this, the formula of a successful business is out there. People go to business school, they learn the widgets, they learn the way of doing business. But I believe that it truly comes down to character of self. And if your company or business has the model of doing the right thing, if people enjoy doing business with you, they will keep doing business with you. If you're not out there looking to do the shady things that people say cannabis can start up or cannabis can do, that will get exposed in its time frame as well. But if you, as an individual and a business and a brand, make sure to do the right thing every time, then you should be somewhat successful. That's my hippie Debbie-ish. I'm a hippie at heart. I'm a tree hugger. I'm a farmer. I don't know what else to tell you.
Well, yeah, actually, you say a lot of important things and reputation is I think it is such a key part of business. So, you know, it's great when everything's great, everyone's making money. That's all fine and dandy. But your reputation, your business practices, how you're treating other people, that reflects back. And at the most important time is when times are tough, right? And being able to work with people, whether it's your buyer or your distributor, in the tough times, and you can rely on each other's words. That can be a saving grace, you know.
Right, Marianne, I'll give you the last word on that one.
Well, I would say, both of these gentlemen certainly have an understanding of what it's going to take. But it's going to go back to, I think, what Lou said, and that's the, business basics. You need to understand your market. You need to understand who they are. You need to develop your brand based on your corporate self and your corporate responsibility. I love that. And do the homework to understand how you reach that market, how you target that market, and how you price your products so that you are competitive and you are viable.
And something else you said earlier about networking too, which is what you guys do. Building a network, people with different disciplines and other experiences, and staying in touch so you get the best practices. Using the don'ts from around the space. You can't be siloed. You can't be siloed in this business. You kind of have to be out there constantly, I think, learning, looking for new information, new strains, new disease. I mean, you just have to be on point on all fronts. But that's my spiel. But listen, guys, this has been really great. I think we can go on forever. I want to, but probably have some other panels coming behind us. But I thank you all, and I think your contact information is on the screen, but it'll be presented to the team, to the audience afterwards. So you might get some phone calls, and I think you've opened up a lot of minds. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
It was a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Fossil God.
This is an original instrumental.
Holy smokes. That was a deep panel. Before we go on, I have to make a correction from a previous panel. Lawrence Hudson is with Kronos Group as a government affairs associate and not Canopy. So apologies to Lawrence on that, but you can find him at Kronos Group. Hey, Tamika.
Hey, everybody. Hey,
is
Todd.
back, and we're joined by Todd Erling, the executive director of HVADC. How you doing, Todd?
Thumbs up. Good job, you guys.
Todd, huge kudos to you and HVADC in becoming an intermediary lender People don't understand how huge that is, but that can help to break down some barriers when accessing funding and financing, which is one of the hugest challenges, especially in the cannabis market or any market. For that matter. So that is something that HVADC is able to do in addition to networking, but really be able to help businesses access some of those capital needs, especially for equipment and infrastructure buildup. So that's a huge lift, and we need more organizations like yourself doing that creative financing piece that's so needed.
Well, thank you for those kind words. It's been a long-term plan and was identified as a critical need as we launched HVADC back in 2007. Ironically, HVADC, as we work right now with you both and the team that put this together with funding from American Farmland Trust, we actually were born of a study that American Farmland Trust did back in the early 2000s, identifying needs for Hudson Valley farmers. And, some of those we've been able to address, the technical assistance, working with you guys as not only business members and entrepreneurs, but also sources of resources to mentor and peer other businesses, but also the idea of dedicated capital and the lack of it and the need of it. And so some of this stuff really doesn't have a finish line. It's a horizon, and we're constantly striving towards it. And we want to see what's over the horizon. We're going to keep pushing. The capital is a big component of that. We have some New York State capital. We have some federal capital coming in from CARES Act money. And we hope to identify dedicated capital just for hemp and cannabis in the future.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Well, I hope you stick around a little bit and look at some of the upcoming panels. We have 2 more panels for today, day 1. We are getting comments and questions in the chat rooms, and we'll be sure to follow up at the end of day 2 with a lot of those questions, hopefully answered to your satisfaction, plus a way to view some of these videos that you might have missed. But next, we're going to bring up a panel, and this was a doozy. I remember sitting in on this one. It was an incredible panel with some folks from the industry. But let's say, cultivation is amazing, and I really want to start a farm myself. But let's say you don't want to be plant touching, or you can't be plant touching for whatever reason. There are other key careers in the space that are very necessary and very important if this industry is going to survive into the future. You have your main licenses, cultivation, retail, processing, but there's a whole lot of other infrastructure needs that are going to be necessary for the industry. And our next panel is going to address those. So please stick around for that.
This is an original instrumental.
Today's panel, we're talking about key careers in the cannabis industry. And I'm pleased to have, first of all, my co-host, Mr. Curtis Archer, who's with me. Curtis and I host a show on WHCR 90.3 FM called Soul Lounge Primetime. We also stream live on YouTube and Facebook, and we have covered the legalization of cannabis in New York since about 2018. And so we're pleased to be able to come through this forum and share with you some insights from 3 industry insiders and veterans about just what the opportunities are to get involved in the cannabis industry. So before we begin, I want to just give people a little bit of a framework to understand that right now the cannabis industry is about a $25 billion industry. It's roughly the same size as the music industry right now. But over the next 7 years or so, by the time we reach 2030, it's projected to be over $100 billion industry. And so the reason we say this is that as you're looking for a career, look for an industry that's going to grow in leaps and bounds. And so as you're looking for your entry point, you want to find a way to leverage the skills, experience, and passions that you have now and find a place where you fit in that you can grow in that as the industry grows. And so with that, we want to introduce to you our three panelists. First, we want to start off with Gia Marone from the organization Women Grow. And she has been a guest on our show a number of times, and she has been very, very deeply involved in the process of legalization. So, Gia, welcome to the panel.
Welcome, Gia.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Next, I want to introduce Lisa Reed, and Lisa has been involved from the policy end. And I want to give you perspective that we didn't just fall into legalization. There was a lot of hard work and effort that has been done over the course of the last 10 plus years, really more than that, to be able to bring a process of legalization to New York State that is fair and equitable, and addresses all the needs. And Lisa is going to tell us about that process, because that process did not end. In fact, it's ongoing. And there are continued opportunities in having an engagement with the process of how this industry rolls out. And last, but certainly not least, Dr. Kenneth R. Weisberg. And he is Weinberg. I'm sorry. My eyes are not as good as they used to be. And Dr. Weinberg is going to talk about the medical opportunities. And it's important to understand that there would be no legal cannabis anywhere in this country if it wasn't for medical cannabis, which has led the way. And yet we are still just at an early point of understanding the impact of cannabis in terms of healthcare and health outcomes. So welcome, everybody.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Yes, great to be here. Thank you.
So Gia, do you want to start and give us a little background in terms of how you got involved and what have you been doing in the industry?
Sure. So my name is Gia Marone, as you mentioned, and it's interesting. You attributed me to Women Grow, but honestly, before Women Grow, I had my other business, which is GVM Communications, and really GVM Communications is what led me into the cannabis industry. So GVM Communications is a PR, brand strategy, business development firm that I've had for 10 years. And when I attended my first Women Grow meeting as just a kind of curious person about, the emergence of this industry, it's at that first meeting that I realized the importance of ancillary businesses to the cannabis industry. It's where I understood that while everyone is looking at cultivation and retail for licenses, it's the ancillary businesses that actually help to support and really amplify the businesses, right? And whether from the policy side to the medical side, to the legal side, to marketing, graphics, what have you. Without those businesses, our industry in itself, would probably be left open-ended in terms of how are these businesses going to be seen across the states of which they operate, or perhaps how are they going to get the proper representation? See, that's the sirens telling me you're spot on. So I apologize, but it's because of my company, GVM, that allowed me to operate in the cannabis industry. And what's great about that is I didn't have to do anything other than expand my services to start taking on cannabis clients. And the one thing about the ancillary side of the industry is it doesn't require you a license to operate just in that state. It actually allows you to operate across the country. So it actually gives you a broader footprint and a broader reach in terms of services. So my clients can be anywhere from New York to having a client that operates between the US and Australia. And that's just because we're providing them PR and branding and business development consulting.
Great. Thank you, Jay. So Lisa, can you give us a little bit of your journey into this wilderness?
Absolutely. I say to people all the time, there's nothing I like to talk about more than cannabis and politics. And that's been true for more than a decade now that I've been doing cannabis work in New York State. By way of history, I was a social worker for my first career, and sort of realized that policy was where I wanted to be, and affecting change on a much larger scale. And so I've been fortunate to be a state lobbyist for the better part of 23 years now. And there was a period of time over a decade ago where there was a group of moms out of Syracuse with kids who had very severe epilepsy and Dravet syndrome, who were organizing. And there had been a legalization bill in New York that had languished for many, many years, that had lots of problems with it, never moved anywhere. And a very small company out of Colorado hired me, and we began down the path of drafting a medical cannabis bill, which obviously ultimately got passed. And while the bill that got passed initially was not what we wanted, we sort of had to take it or leave it, sort of stance from the governor. This was the one thing in the first term of Governor Cuomo's administration that he absolutely did not want to do. It was not part of his playbook, and we dragged him there with the help of a lot of medical professionals and doctors and patients and kids, and some very strong elected officials. So it was a very long 3 years, but 3 years is a small amount of time in New York politics. And the politics were very different then. We had a Republican Senate, and so we had to think about a way to do this that would get the votes necessary in the Republican Senate to feel comfortable with setting up the program. So luckily over the years, the program has expanded. It's not expanded enough as far as we're concerned, but as soon as the bill was passed, we pivoted and began to work on legalization. And here we are today.
Thank you so much.
I have to know, because certainly we do know that the whole stigmatization of cannabis users, was a big thing of keeping it from getting legalized. But in terms of, let's say, kids who suffer from epilepsy, autism, what have you, how are these clinical trials being done? And was that the basis, the evidence necessary to go to Governor Cuomo to say, hey, look at the evidence here, this is a good thing? How was that done?
Honestly, it wasn't about the clinical trials, because the clinical trials with Epidiolex and GW Pharmaceuticals were not really treating the kids that needed to be treated. Because, and I'm sure Dr. Weinberg knows this well, because of the entourage effect, you need a certain amount of THC to work with the CBD. So high dosing CBD alone does not necessarily control children's severe epilepsy. So it really was, back when we were doing this effort, it doesn't take a lot to get people to write and talk about cannabis, right? It's a sexy issue, especially in politics. But we had really, really great parents and kids who were in the Capitol every single day for a year. We had children that were having unbelievable seizures in the galleries of the Senate and the Assembly, in the Capitol outside the governor's office. And without those parents and those kids who really struggled to get what they needed for their children, we would have never been able to pass that legislation.
Gotcha. Well, you know what, Bob? It's a great lead-in then for Dr. Weinberg.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lisa, because it really underscores what I was saying, which is important for people to understand. Our politicians didn't necessarily want to legalize. It was something that the groundswell of medical patients, whether it be mothers of kids with autism or Vietnam vets with PTSD, people who really needed this demanded that our legislators get involved and bring this into New York State. And this is what had happened in the Western states, and it finally got here, and that's opened the door now to adult use, because along the way, people kind of saw like, hey, this really doesn't hurt people, it actually helps people. And so that's the context that we want to look into as we go into the next phase, which is a combination of medical cannabis programs still going forward in some way, morphing, we're not sure how it does, and then this adult use, meaning that the average person can consume cannabis products without threat of losing their job, losing their house, or going to jail. So on that note, Dr. Weinberg, if you could give us a little bit of background in terms of your journey into cannabis from the health perspective.
Yeah, I think as I was thinking about it and as Lisa was talking about it, there were a few threads. You can see I'm a child, well, I'm old enough to have been a child of the 60s. So certainly I was very involved, had a lot of experience growing up with cannabis, but really didn't know much about the medical benefits. I sort of was following what was going on in California, but it wasn't relevant because it wasn't happening here. But interestingly, one of the other threads is I had known Gottfried, who I'm sure you would work with, Lisa. He'd been pushing that bill for 20 years. And I happened to know him because I was, and still am, on the board of Physicians for a National Health Program, trying to get single payer, which Dick has also been pushing. And so I knew about it. And at one of our meetings, one of my friends said, New York State is about to legalize cannabis. Are you interested in starting a medical practice? And so myself and two other ER docs like me started Cannabis Doctors of New York. And actually very early on, we actually had a panel where we had Assemblyman Gottfried speak, which was great because he talked a lot about the mishigas that he went through. And I know that, I think the initial bill had 20 qualifying conditions, and Cuomo said, oh, no, I'm only going to allow you 10. And then they gradually worked their way up. And interestingly, I was just thinking, when you talk about PTSD, when they were trying to get PTSD passed as, I don't know, the 11th or 12th condition, there was a Republican congressman from Long Island. I don't know if you were involved with this, Lisa, who was a vet who was blocking it. And I actually got on Channel 11, Mary, I'm blocking on the name of but she did a great show with me and a vet and sort of targeted this congressman. And sure enough, the next day or within a week, they allowed PTSD to be one of the conditions. And I can tell you, that from my experience, it's great that was added. And it's been an amazing experience for me. I was an emergency physician for over 30 years. And this is such a different experience for me, very gratifying and intellectually challenging. And I still have to say it's a very complicated plant. And a lot of the, to your point before about the research, because it's a Schedule I narcotic, the research it's very, very difficult. I've been trying to get a project done through Columbia Care, one of the dispensaries, with Northwell, who has a very robust program trying to do research with cannabis. It's been 3 years and we still have not been able to get it off the ground. It's just very difficult. So.
But that research is really the key to really all of the breakthroughs that we expect to come from cannabis. And maybe you can explain to people a little bit about just the cannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system and some of the reasons why cannabis health is so different than anything else that we've seen in medical practice.
Well, it's interesting. I've been told that I always wax too hyperbolic about cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, but it's extraordinary. It's the master system. When you look at the brain and the rest of the body, it is connected to so many different systems, the dopamine system, the endorphin system. That's why it can be so helpful for people who are going through opioid withdrawal, because it really tamps down those withdrawal symptoms. And the plant itself has well over 100 cannabinoids, but then it has terpenes and other chemicals that we're just starting to learn about. The terpenes, everybody would know. Anytime you smell skunk or whatever type of brand, it's the terpenes that give it the smell, but they are so important. And when Lisa was talking about the entourage effect, you really want as close to the whole plant as possible. But as a physician, what I love about the program in New York is that it is precise and consistent. And when you go somewhere to one of the dispensaries and you get a product that has 5 milligrams of THC, 5 of CBD, each time you get that, you're going to get the exact same thing, and you're pretty much always going to get the same effects from it, which as a physician, I really like. The other thing, and this is a whole other conversation, they are finally now, I think, being forced more than anything else, all the dispensaries, to talk about the minor cannabinoids, CBG, which is hot now, the terpenes. That up until now, the dispensaries didn't really have to talk about it. The Wadsworth lab up in Albany wasn't really quantifying it. Now that's starting to happen, which again, I think is really important because you want as much information when you walk in someplace to get something. Sorry, I apologize. You want to know all that you're getting. You want to know all of the terpenes. Because again, it's a whole other conversation, but I would have patients who would go to, for instance, Columbia Care and get a 1-to-1 product. And then they go to Etain and have allegedly the same product, and yet they would get different effects. And I came to realize it's because of those minor cannabinoids and the terpenes. Each of the different dispensaries is growing different strains. So it's important for us now that we're able to get as much information as possible. And that will help also when we start doing research.
Please let's just keep in mind that the world has been doing research in the space of cannabis for many, many, many years. Just because the United States doctors are not doing research because it's not legal here doesn't mean the rest of the world hasn't been studying this for decades.
Can I echo what Lisa just said? Because Lisa, you just took the words right out of my mouth. As I referenced working with clients across in other countries, having had clients in Israel, in Germany, and in Australia, they're already doing this research. But if I were to circle back to what Dr. Weinberg just mentioned, this topic is about careers in cannabis. And here's a great example of where education comes in for professionals, for patients, as well as for other healthcare providers within the space. When you think about patient advocates and how they're necessary for multiple reasons. As when patients are entering a dispensary for the first time, and they're able to sit down not only with the pharmacist, but with the patient advocate to help talk them through exactly what this experience will be. But also in terms of entering into this industry, there are many who are looking at this industry just for business, just for that business opportunity. But this education component is so critical to the business needs. And so when we're looking at careers in this industry, education plays an important role, whether on the medical side or on the business professional side. So I appreciated what Dr. Weinberg said, because, people take that information for granted, or they're not understanding the importance of knowing that critical information of terpenes and strains and so on and so forth. So I'm glad to hear this is being said, because even in my line of work, I need to understand that information so I can best serve my clients and help navigate them through this industry. And I'm sure Lisa would need to do that in terms of representing patients. And so this is all very familiar to me. And I'm hoping that those that are listening to this conversation understand that while their careers are important, education plays a big role in what we do.
Can I just say that, one of the things that bothers me the most as a physician is I've heard and read that maybe 10% of medical schools across the country teach about the endocannabinoid system. And my feeling very strongly as MRTA is going to be enacted is that New York State should be providing, it's certainly in the state schools, courses in that. I mean, I think it's a huge need because, you know, again, and to what you were saying before, that about the fact that, yes, there is a lot of research being done around the world, but I think American doctors tend to poo-poo that to some extent. I think, you know, that's one of the biggest issues. Where's the research? Well, Israel, you're absolutely right. They're doing great stuff there. Canada as well. But they want, you know, the American stuff. So I think it's really important. When I talk to doctors, they will say exactly where's the research. And I think New York State should be taking the lead in terms of education. I would love for there to be a way for the medical schools in New York State to be teaching this.
We've talked about that before, Dr. Weinberg. And listen, for as far as New York has come on this issue, there are light years to go, right? So we had a major hurdle with the New York State Medical Society and still have a hurdle with them. There are a lot of doctors who are not supportive of this. There was, when we were doing medical, there was a memo issued at the largest medical center in the Capital District here, who told all of their doctors, under no circumstances are you to recommend cannabis for any of your patients. So the stigma continues, the work needs to be done, and the education is key to that.
At least, I mean, is this the pushback in terms of a gateway type drug? What is it?
Well, I mean, you know, no offense to you, Dr. Weinberg, but, you know, doctors don't like to be told what they have to do.
Right.
And they don't like to be told that they have to take more education after they've completed their education. So while it would be great if medical schools would incorporate a cannabis rotation as part of their basic education, to tell doctors who have been practicing for years, you have to go take this 2-hour certification course on cannabis before you can recommend cannabis, they didn't want to hear that. They also don't believe in the science. And why don't they believe in the science? Because it hasn't been studied in the United States. And doctors in America seem to think that they're smarter and better than any other doctors in the rest of the free world.
And to that point, Lisa, you're absolutely right. And when we think about from a federal level, you know, the only research that was being done was out of the University of Mississippi. And we already know that the results and the studies that were coming out of there were so behind. They were decades, centuries behind, felt like. And now with those additional licenses that were given to select schools to do the study, what I'm finding from the industry, healthcare or scientists are saying, this is not enough. We need more than 6 or 7 or 10 or 12 licenses given out, given the number of institutions across the country. One of the things that Women Grow did in New York City is that we supported Medgar Evers in their launch of their cannabis minor as a degree-bearing program, knowing that they had a nursing program at the school. And the reason being is that, going back to what I said earlier in terms of education being the important piece of this, is that when I look at my community, and I'm going to speak to more Black and Brown communities who have healthcare workers in terms of nurses, in terms of home care attendants, it's so important for us to understand what this medicine is, because many of them are oftentimes coming from perhaps Caribbean countries, coming from the continent of Africa, or even from southern states that said, listen, this was something that actually historically was a part of our practice, but we were deemed illegal. And so now, if we're able to embrace this yet again, learn about this, and really apply it to the people that we're serving within our communities, we can perhaps have a healthier community. When you think about what oftentimes Black and Brown communities are faced with high blood pressure, diabetes, and then you go to these dispensaries and then you speak to the pharmacist there and they're telling you, hey, listen, if you're taking these tinctures or you're taking particular strains, this can help lower your blood pressure. This can provide you assistance in terms of leveling your sugar levels, right? If you're a diabetic or any other pain type management. But again, it's going back to looking at what these careers can be, looking at the higher institutions, which is why we were honored to work with Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn, right? Because it's not just going to the Ivies and the major schools. We also have to think about our local schools and our community colleges, where they're also impacting people within communities that can best serve from this information.
To that point, Gia, you're absolutely right. I mean, when I work with my clients who are either current license holders or looking to obtain a license under the adult use program, the number one thing I say to them is, what is your educational component going to be? Are you going to partner with a community college to do a lab certification? Are you going to partner with a community college to do a horticulture? The education is there for community college certifications to give kids a pathway into the industry. This is like getting in on Google on the ground floor. I mean, there's a real opportunity here in the community college sphere, and even beyond the community college. I've talked to a client about, how about we work with a local juvenile detention center, and we help kids that are aging out of foster care, and we help them get into a program so that they can learn the industry from the science aspect to the dirt and clipping and trimming aspect. You know, one of the things that was really important to us when we set up the medical program was to have a pharmacist on site. Not many states have done that. I don't think anybody had done that before New York had done that. But it was critical to us that we had somebody on site who could talk to patients about what their healthcare needs were to better set them up with a proper regime of cannabis use. We also brought the union in. That had never happened. You know, people can say you can be on both sides of the union issue, right? But in New York, union is critically important, and we would have never gotten this piece of legislation done if it wasn't for UFCW. And as a result, people have really good career benefit, salary increasing jobs that they can set up a life, buy a home, send their children to college, whatever the case may be, in a legitimate business and career path. And that was critical for us.
Yes, I want to underline some of the bullet points we just talked about. One, first of all, the importance of education and the fact that those resources are coming on board. So if you are interested in getting into this career, you should look for those opportunities, because they're there, and they're there so that people can get the education to fill the jobs that we know are coming. The second thing that Lisa said was very important, that unions are supporting this as well, which is great, because you can go into an industry that's going to have a support behind you getting a job, making sure there are fair wages and fair benefits, and giving you an opportunity to go into an industry that's not just stable, but slated to grow exponentially. And then I would underline also that education is not just taking courses, but it's also starting off your education with Google, and find out, go online and learn about where some of the trends are and what's going to be happening. I'm going to try and see if I can do a share screen. And I just want to, yes.
You know, someone said to me, all you need is God and Google, and I believe in that.
that goes a long way. So I want to show you this site. It's called flowhub.com, and you can go to flowhub.com/cannabis-industry statistics. And there's a good, more or less solid page on where the industry is now and where it's going. And I want people to go there. I'm not going to dwell on all the numbers, but things like cannabis sales to female customers increased by 55%. 44% of Americans now have access to legal recreational cannabis. 91% of adults want to legalize weed. All these things are giving you indicators on where the market is going and what it's going to be doing. And so a lot of it is about understanding where those things, such as markets such as edibles, there are so many sub products that are not really out there right now that are going to be the products that people really demand. And that's the direction you want to set yourself up, and learn, learn to earn.
Well, also in addition to that, because I think that that's a great reference point, while we were talking about there were a lack of research on the medical or science side, on the careers and job side in the industry, there have been reports that are coming out. In 2021, Leafly created a jobs report that gave it a high level look at the industry of where the opportunities are, where the gaps are falling within the industry. MJ Biz Daily came out with a report in terms of women and minorities and where those gaps are in the industry in terms of ownership and careers. And so, you know, just staying focused on the conversation about careers in the industry, I think, again, oftentimes people are looking at the plant touching side and not recognizing the opportunities on the ancillary side. And so in preparation for Bob and Curtis, because they're always coming out with the great questions, I pulled up a list of the types of careers people can consider or could consider in this industry, because again, it doesn't limit them to operate just in the state of which they live, because it doesn't require a license. But they could be a security company, an e-commerce website development, testing lab, marketing, media, hydroponics, extraction, commercial kitchen, banking, HR, accounting, real estate. These are all businesses and services that support the industry where talent is much needed. And it would be amazing to see more people from our state even supporting our in-state operators, as well as working across the country.
Let's not forget too our vocational, right? We've got HVAC systems, we've got electrical needs, we've got water needs. There's tons of vocational jobs that are available in the cannabis industry that people don't even think of because they automatically go to that plant touching job.
Design is so necessary in terms of how do you build out your space. I agree, Lisa.
Absolutely.
Lisa, can you also talk about the different license types in terms of the businesses that are being licensed and what the opportunities are around those businesses?
So one of the things that MRTA did different than the medical licensing, and again, remember the politics is very different, right? So the politics were in, you know, when we did the medical program, was the key concern was diversion, right? Everybody was terrified that product would be going out the back door, and how do we control for that? And so the seed to sale model was what we could sell in New York. It was what we could get the politicians, particularly the Republican politicians, behind, because it was one hand, right? If you had some sort of diversion from your license, you pulled one license and the whole operation shut down. So that made sense for the time. What MRTA does is really break out a number of opportunities with lots of entry points for people to get into the industry, some of which cost a lot of capital, like building out a cultivation facility or a processing facility. But there's a delivery license, and the delivery license was really designed with the mind that you only needed, you know, sort of 25 guys in a van to be able to get a delivery license, right? So there's with the multiple levels of licensing, it offered a wider variety of entry points for people to get into the industry. So there's a micro business license, which is sort of a craft brewing model. If you think about cannabis, you know, craft cannabis, there's a delivery license, there's a distributor's license, there's a processor's license, there's a cultivator's license, there's an on-site consumption license, which is great, right? We've got a lot of people in New York City that live in federally subsidized housing. They need a place where they can safely, legally consume cannabis. So we need cannabis lounges. And there's also a co-op license, you know, for the upstate farmers who are desperately in need of additional crops to grow in New York. So you get 4 or 5 farmers together and they get a co-op license. So MRTA really afforded an opportunity for a lot of entry points into the industry without needing sort of that big capital behind you.
Hey, Bob, one of the areas that I meant to mention earlier was the importance of technology that plays in our industry. I don't think people, we're often talking about the lack of access to finance and capital and the financial side, but the technology side of the industry, that sector plays an important role for pretty much all of our operators. Even when we're thinking about from seed to sale, being able to track those systems, all of the software that's needed for any of these operations to exist, whether from the plant touching side or the ancillary side, technology plays a big role. We launched on the Women Grow platform a series just dedicated to the CannaTech space, really introducing what those opportunities look like in the industry. Because again, when people generally think about the cannabis industry, they're only thinking about cultivation and processing. But when you think about the vapes that we have or any of those types of technology, we need engineers that are going to be able to develop those devices. And so the CannaTech sector, I think, is yet another critical component to our industry. And I hope that that's something people will consider in terms of career opportunities, or those that are transitioning into the industry, looking at where they could apply their skill sets. And even from the cultivation side, there's a ton of technology that goes into that. And being able to work with the developers as they're building out space, technology in terms of, as I said, tracking or even the software system that's needed for many of these cultivators is something that people can consider.
I think we'd be remiss too if we didn't talk about OCM, the Office of Cannabis Management, right? So it's based in Albany. There are a lot of jobs available. They're staffing up an entire agency. If you go on their website, there is a link to their career opportunities. They're really solid entry level, but good paying jobs in the state with state benefits. So you might have to be in the Capital District, but we should definitely recognize them as well.
Have they been well?
I'm sorry?
I wonder how well they've been funded, because I can tell you from the medical side that when I'm dealing with them, things are very much delayed. And I think that's a big problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you think about what it takes to set up an entire industry, right? And we moved this from the Department of Health, where the medical program used to be housed. And I'm grateful because under Dr. Zucker's leadership, he was not a fan of cannabis and not a supporter of cannabis at all, which was part of what delayed our ability to even get the medical program up and running. And OCM not only had to set up an entire agency, but also assume the medical program and begin to draft regs and to put out conditional licenses. I mean, it was a massive undertaking, and they're trying to staff up to like 200 people. So,
They're building and flying at the same time.
Exactly.
So we've got to start wrapping things up. So I want to give each of you just an opportunity to just share some final thoughts with us about career development in cannabis. Gia?
I'll just say from the advocacy side of things, if you're passionate about something and you want to be an advocate from a policy side, there's lots of ways to get into that industry. There's not-for-profits, there's, internships in the New York State Legislature. Go reach out to your local elected officials and see if you can work in their offices. I mean, advocacy is a massive umbrella. You just have to find what you're passionate about and make your voice heard.
And Lisa, thank you for your service.
My pleasure.
I would say certainly from the medical perspective, I mean, I just have a small office, but I have several people who work for me doing a lot of my work. I have a lot of need for patient liaisons, computer work. I have someone who does research for me, but I'm a small office, and I don't know how many medical offices are actually dedicated just to this, so I'm glad that I'm able to provide employment for the people that I do.
Thank you, Gia.
I would echo what Lisa and Dr. Weinberg have said. You can't. I personally do not think you can be in this industry without being an advocate. We have to continue advocating until this access of this plan is made for everyone, and that means on the business as well as on the medical side. And, I think if anything from this conversation, people realize the importance of education and that the opportunities aren't just limited to licenses, that there are opportunities on the ancillary side, and that people really can take their skill sets and apply them in this industry. It is needed. And if you start out from a volunteer perspective to feel like you need some experience and some comfortability, and then elevate your knowledge and your work capacity to a paid role, then that's what you do. I know that's what I did, right? In terms of entering the industry, I volunteered. I knew I had my past skill set or my current skill set. I just didn't understand quite where I fit. And so I volunteered with Women Grow in the beginning, but I still had my own business. Once I became more comfortable, then I segued into a paid role in terms of consulting in the cannabis space. But I think it's important that we consider what we're currently doing, applying it so that we can create a stronger industry that really best serves us all.
Great. Thank you so much, Gia. And so I would finally, I would say to everybody that follow Gia's lead, leverage the skills that you have, learn the things that you want to learn, and lead with your passion. And you will probably find yourself in a place where you can make a healthy living, maybe create some wealth for yourself, do some good, and enjoy what you're doing. So I want to thank all the panelists. Thank you for those who put together the entire This Business of Cannabis collection of panels. Thank you, John Gilstrap, and hope that this information has been valuable.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
The conversation.
Fossil Prod.
This is an original instrumental.
Hello, everyone. We are back. Hey, guys.
Hi. Well, that was something.
That was something, man. I loved it because when I was running New York State for Women Grow, it would be really wonderful. I didn't see you down there. I saw another location. Sorry. People would come up to me all the time and ask me how to get into the industry. And my immediate go-to response was, what do you do now? And whatever answer they would say. And I'm like, well, don't reinvent the wheel, kind of push it in the cannabis lane, and because there's so many transitional careers, like things that you could literally learn because you want to be educated in the space and don't just come in here and mess it up. But, you can do your industry. Like I came from event planning. I was in sales and I did events. So it was very easy for me to transition because I knew how to sell. I knew how to ask for money for sponsors, and I knew how to put on an event, so that's how I transitioned in. And we are ancillary. We're not plant touching. And I think that was the purpose, was to really reinforce the fact that ancillary businesses are a lot less expensive to get into, and provide such a value to the industry.
Not absolutely.
Amazing too, that has up to able to enter into the industry. I think that's another key component, is understanding that people have been fighting so long for all these ancillary businesses to be able to participate in the industry and be able to be viable and get a piece of the billions of dollars and going to be trillions of dollars that are going to be available in this market. You don't have to be a farmer, and we get the question all the time. I know all of us do. You don't have to be a farmer to be a very viable business, and that's the huge takeaway, is that there's so many different skill sets that need to be amplified, and there's so much need even in Gia addressing OCM and New York State needs. That's just one facet, but every single retailer, every single distributor, every single sector is going to have hiring needs. So this is going to open up so much in workforce development and ability for people to make this lifelong career paths because of the abundance of funds that are available.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Tamika, you're spot on. I want to introduce someone else who's very much involved in our production today, in case you wanted to figure out who's sitting next to me. We're in the studios of 10th Magazine, and we're joined by Carrie Seth.
Hello, everyone. John, nice to see you. Tamika, Tanya, thank you all for the work that you're doing. It was great to be able to hear from so many amazing organizations who are out here creating a level of transparency around the emerging cannabis industry. I myself work in media, and I'm a perfect example of someone who has a particular skill set and an interest as an independent journalist covering politics and agriculture, food, technology from traditionally outsider points of view, so Black and Brown, LGBTQIA+, and looking for opportunities to share stories about how our folks can perhaps get a foot into a space where, let's be honest, folks really do feel like they're sort of owed, and rightfully so, we're owed an opportunity to at least see what's going on out here, where the legislation is going to be leading us, and also rightfully somewhat skeptical about how the industry is being set up and sort of some of the opportunities they might find. We are here in the Hudson River Valley, where lots of folks have infiltrated with romantic notions of what it means to get back to the land and the earth, and lead what a lot of folks here consider to be the simple life. But I think it's been great to hear a lot about the sort of not so simple sort of supply chain in the cannabis space, the not so simple history of the sort of racial politics and socio-political issues that affect this space. So I look forward to being able to learn more from you all and how to bring more folks in and spread the message. So at the 10th Magazine, for folks who are interested in checking us out, we're at 10thmagazine.com. And we've been gravitating, like I said, a lot towards cannabis coverage and a lot about sort of food and agriculture, specifically here in New York State. So it's been great to see everyone here. I had a question for everyone. I know this is our last panel of the day that will be live streaming, but will there be some sort of worksheet or a sort of PDF download? There's been so much information that folks can expect to be able to click into and hear some more in terms of the mechanics of how we might access some of these resources talked about or connect with some of the folks who've shared so much.
Tanya, you want to take that one?
So that we are gonna, with the HVADC, Awaken.Space, and Women Grow, we have some resources that we'll share so people can go directly to HVADC to get those resources.
Wonderful.
Great.
And we want to jump into our next panel because we're already a little over. Just to let everyone know, a reminder, we are having part 2 next Monday. We'll, after this last one, we'll come back, but just put us in your calendar now for next week, same bat time, same bat channel, where we'll have a lot more information, just, kind of rounding up the whole industry in a nutshell. And then, like I said, we'll have resources to grab after the fact. Sound good, everybody?
Sounds cool.
Good.
Sounds good. Okay, cool. So the next one we're talking about are actual licenses. Those that want to apply, like if you're not satisfied with ancillary, which is fine by me. If you wanted to actually apply for one of the, I think, 9 licenses, our next 2 panelists are going to break them down and you're going to get a lot of good information. So get your pens and papers ready. Okay. We'll see you guys in a few.
Fossil Prod.
Hi, this is Gia Marone, and I am president of Women Grow, and I am honored to have this incredible guest with us this evening here to talk about licensing opportunities in New York State. Her name is Christina Bacola, and she is the Chief Counsel of CB Counsel PLCC. She is an attorney, an advocate, and an educator, and she's here to speak with us today about licensing opportunities in New York State, and I'm excited to jump into this conversation, this masterclass with one of the best voices, attorneys, thought leaders in our industry. Welcome, Christina.
Wow, Gia, thank you. It's really an honor to be here with you tonight. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I mean, who better than to speak to you about the licensing opportunities in our state? You've been doing this work for some time. So before we jump right into the questions, I'd love for you to give just some brief background as to what you were doing before focusing on New York State, because you've actually been doing some work in other states, which that's why I said you're one of the thought leaders. You have experience in other states, and you brought that experience here and really helped to push legislation through.
Oh, thanks, Gia. So I've actually been an attorney for almost 20 years. This year it is actually coming up on 20 years. And so I didn't really transition to cannabis until maybe 8 years ago. And initially it was just surveying cannabis to find out if it was a modality to treat my dad's advancing Parkinson's. But from there it grew. And from there I ended up being the general counsel of Haythem. I was a partner in a grow out in Oregon. I have been an attorney dedicated to this space since then. I've invested in retail opportunities in Massachusetts. I've spent maybe the last 3 years focused on the Massachusetts industry and either assisting new applicants or new licensees with raising capital, or in the unfortunate event that they can't find the capital, helping them divest of their licenses and M&A transactions. So I've really seen the full scope of work that can be the cannabis industry.
That's incredible. And so you brought all of that experience to New York State. The MRTA passes in 2021. And here we are today, where a year later, where we're talking about these licensing opportunities. And based on what you've seen in other states, can you talk to us about these licensing opportunities? There's a lot of news around it, and there's also confusion. And I'm hoping that through this discussion, we can clear up some misconceptions and also help to direct people to the true opportunities that will be presented to them as New Yorkers.
Sure. So indeed, the full scope of licenses is not available just yet, but there is one license that is available and another license that is imminent. The license that is currently available is called the Conditional Adult Use Cultivators License. Now, people who are eligible, or entities that are eligible for this license, have experience in hemp, in the cultivation of hemp under New York State's regulated program. These are individuals that have grown hemp under the regulated program for at least 2 years, who now want to transition to growing cannabis. So as you know, over the last couple of months, OCM has approved a number of those licenses. I think it's up to 152 now. And with that license, that license is designed to get plants in the ground this year. Right. And so in New York, when you make a regulation, you have to put it forth for public comment. Right. And depending on what stage of the regulation, if it's the initial regulation or a redraft of that regulation, that triggers a 60-day comment period or a 45-day comment period. Now, if we started that process, let's say in March, that means that New York State hemp growers that are transitioning would most likely lose their growing season. So rather than issue any regulations around that, the Office of Cannabis Management here said, you know what, here's some guidance. We're going to go ahead and look through our files, determine who is pre-approved for this, and get them started in the process. So that's been really interesting to watch, an entire class of license develop without any regulations. Now, you've probably heard a lot, Gia, as well, about the conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And this is, if you've turned on the news, any kind of local news station, and this is the people who have been justice impacted are the first who are going to receive licenses to distribute or to sell cannabis in a retail dispensary. And that is a very good heading, but we really need to get below and look at the details of that. So in order to qualify for this, this is for justice impacted individuals. Now, justice impacted means either the individual themselves was convicted of a cannabis related crime prior to the passing of MRTA, which again was March 31st, 2021, or they had a parent, a spouse, a dependent, they were the legal dependent of, or their legal guardian had an arrest. So here, what we see is it's to own the justice impacted relationship isn't just for you, it could be someone in your family. And I think
But immediate family, the way you have carved it out, not a sibling.
It does not include siblings.
Okay, thank you.
Up and down, but not across. And yes, that's right. And that's a very good distinction to make. And the other aspect of this is that the individual who is justice impacted also has had to have a 10% ownership in a net profitable business for at least 2 years. And that is something that has a lot of individuals scratching their head, a lot of legacy folk, a lot of other justice impacted individuals who have been impacted to such a degree that they haven't been able to open their own businesses. This would exclude them. And that is, I think, speaking again about the regulation process. So these regulations came out in March. At the end of May, comments to these conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses were to be submitted, and I submitted with a variety of groups, and that is the number one, if not number two, comment that was made in each of the groups. Why is this required? I have my own thoughts about why that's required. We don't necessarily have to get into it, but I do want to also point out that I do not anticipate that the Office of Cannabis Management is going to move away from this.
But I have a question before you go on.
Conviction?
Say it again.
About what a conviction is?
Well, but also I want, before you go further, just for anyone that's tuning in, I want to make sure that we're speaking to everyone who perhaps may have questions. So MRTA is the pronunciation of the MRTA. That's number one. Justice impacted, because that's typically not a reference that people will hear. And so when we ask these questions, we want to make sure that people fully understand. I don't want to take our terminologies for granted, because we loosely throw around MRTA because we're in the realm of this, and then we expect people to know. So I want to make sure that when we're saying justice impacted, these are people who have been formally incarcerated for cannabis possession, correct?
No, not necessarily. So it's for the regulations say that it is for a conviction, and it cites a place in the criminal code, right? And so activities that have either been decriminalized or legalized are some of the individuals who, if they have had convictions, would be eligible. Now, with respect to the word convictions, there are a lot of people who become justice impacted, and they might have an ACD, they might have an arrest, they might have had many different contact points with the criminal justice system that absolutely impacted their lives and upended it, and should qualify them as justice impacted. It is clear by what is written in the regulations, it says convicted. That being said, when you push individuals who are in charge at OCM and the CCB, they have on other occasions said that it involves arrests and it involves other kinds of contact with the criminal justice system. So I anticipate that that is going to be one of the refinements or clarifications we see from OCM in response to the comments to the conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses that were submitted last month.
And to reconfirm, that is for individuals or their parent or guardian or child, correct?
Child, legal dependent.
Legal dependent
of, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then the other question that I wanted to ask you as a follow-up, you said that they would have needed to have 10% ownership in a business for at least 2 years. And does it matter the type of legal operation? Could it be, you know, as an entrepreneur, I don't know, delivery person, like,
yes,
you know, again, like
the
what are
qualification
some
there
examples?
that it's net profitable. That is the qualification. So there is, from the regulations, you can tell that the OCM is also very interested in seeing customer service experience, in seeing any kind of retail experience, in seeing things that would speak to an entrepreneur being easily or able to more easily transition into the retail dispensary universe.
Now, does it mean, Christina, and I want to move on to the other application opportunities, but before we move on, and I also want to circle back to the point that you weren't able to make because I had to ask my question, but does it mean that by having those 2 years of a proven track record, would they then have to submit credit report or anything else that's relating to a track record of success there, of financial success?
And the number of documents that need to be submitted along with this from the regulations that we've seen are numerous and lengthy. So one of the things that they're requiring is an audit, and some depending on the audit that you have, it could be expensive. So we want clarity around that and what kind of audit is going to be required. There's going to have to be financial accounting too, as to the individuals who are at the licensed entity, or who are who essentially at the end of the day will be the owners of the license. They're going to have to go through some pretty lengthy disclosure forms about financial banking records and tracking the money that might be used to operate their conditional adult use retail dispensary license and where it came from. So there's this license. I want to assure people that if they do not get this license, I do not think this is the end of the world.
Right.
This is something that's so important. You shouldn't give up. You should see this as this license is an opportunity to get your ducks in the row for the next tranche of licenses, or the next group of licenses that become available. Overall, the conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses are supposed to be 10% of all licenses that are issued for retail dispensary in the state. There are also some really incredible things about this license that also have limitations to them. One of the most incredible things is that New York State is pairing this license with loans, and they're going to structured loans so that loans, yes, as part of the debt fund. So individuals can get their initial operating costs off the ground, their real estate, their build out. And as someone who represents clients in a variety of other states where no one has ever paired money and equity, no one, what I can tell you firsthand that some of the largest amounts that they end up paying are for these very things. And so for there to be this assistance is unheard of.
It is. I was just, that's why I said loans. I wanted to repeat that so that we were clear, because that's not a common practice that we've seen in any other state, and in terms of for social equity.
No, none. This is the first of its kind. Now, that being said, there are certain limitations that are going to come along with that, right? the DASNY, which is the Dormitory Authority in the state of New York, who is going to have a hand in this, there will probably be a lot of similarities between these initial adult use dispensary licenses, because they're going to have the same build out, more or less. They're going to have product that is from the initial conditional adult use cultivators, which is by and large going to be grown outdoor or in a greenhouse. And so that's not necessarily, the indoor grow that a lot of New York consumers are accustomed to sampling. So there are some really amazing things about this, but it is not going to, I don't think it's going to thrust any early licensee into a spotlight where other tranches can't compete effectively.
So these are the early licenses, the conditional cultivation, adult use cultivation, and then we have the social equity retail licenses that you just mentioned. So that's only the tip of the iceberg of this. Nice. There are still other opportunities. Can we actually run through?
You can.
Please.
So we have the nursery where you have your baby plants, the nursery license, the cultivation license where you're growing your plants, the processor license where your plant material goes through a process to make edibles or tinctures or waxes or rosins or resins, etc. You then have your distributor license that brings product from one license holder to another license holder in the cannabis chain. You have your retail license, you have your delivery license, social consumption license, co-op license, micro business license, and laboratory testing license. That should be it.
Wow. And if I remember correctly, I believe that the regulations are open for comment for the testing.
Testing, yes, exactly. The testing, retail testing, and you can find that on the OCM's website under their board meetings. That is one of the hardest, things to do in cannabis these days seems to be navigating the OCM website. And so if you're ever looking for the regulations, they always seem to hang out under that tab. So be sure to go there. There's also, there have been initial regulations that have been put out for processing, not for processing, for packaging and for labeling, and those are open for comment too. Prior to this, and prior to the conditional adult use retail dispensary resolutions, we've seen some resolutions for cannabinoid hemp, for home grow, for medical patients too.
Well, I just checked the site before our discussion because I was preparing for this because I knew you were just going to share so much great information. Believe it or not, the OCM now has the regulatory tab on their homepage for comments, so it can be easily found, which I think is a great point. As you said, it was hard, it was difficult to find before, and so I think that's what limited people from giving that feedback and comment. So it is on the homepage. You just have to scroll down and you'll see the tabs there. And so in regards to these applications, because I want to get deeper into that, in case someone is wondering, do they need to have prior experience?
With cannabis, no. Outside of the conditional cultivator license where you have had experience with hemp at the very least. But no, that is not required to have cannabis experience. Now, that doesn't hurt people. That helps to build out an application. And we know that OCM is going to be paying very close attention to people's organizational chart, for example, and who is filling what roles, and if there are missing roles in the entity that would be essential for the license to carry on its cannabis activities.
Now, you said something earlier, and I want to actually circle back to teams because I've actually met people that said, oh, I'm going after a license and I have an attorney and I've got a writer. And then my question to them is, oh, great, you've got a team. They said, yes, I've got that team. And I said, well, what about your growers? What about your operations manager? And they said, oh, do I need to have that now? And my answer was, you need to at least be able to identify who those people are because they need to be a part of your application. And there was
there's a misunderstanding, if people who had not been a part of this process before, that only they would be submitting their information, not realizing that their team members who will be running the operations with them would need to also include perhaps their taxes and their resumes and their,
Absolutely.
do you know what I mean? Like anyone that kind of owns a piece, right, into that business, or that is operating in some capacity, would have to be a part of that application submission.
So that's an interesting point, because I think we should make the distinction between owners and workers here, because sometimes, and contractors, right? So when I say a team, I mean, if I look at an org chart and I see that I need a grower, I need, you know, a master trimmer, whatever it is, I might not want those individuals as members of my entity, but I'm still going to have to fill their position. So I'm going to have to know what their essential roles are and responsibilities are, so that I can at least draft up an ad, a help wanted ad for that position. Now, when you say team, there might be individuals who are passive investors. They are important. People with capital are important. We like money. Cannabis is a very money-heavy industry. So, but these are not people who are going to be involved in the day-to-day operation. They will be silent investors. And so a lot of teams are run that way. So yes, the individuals who might not be part of the ownership structure and are providing essential services, it's unlikely that they will have necessarily personal disclosures forms, but absolutely the individuals who are giving money, who are on the cap table, who are part of the ownership, who might be part of the management, who might be part of
your C-suite, correct?
Your C-suite will likely have to go through some personal disclosures, but it's really the people who have who are parties of interest. What's a part? That's a term of art. And so those are individuals who exercise management control, have contributed some kind of capital, have some kind of ownership of the company.
Good to know. So you also mentioned micro licenses. And so what I didn't ask you, and what I should have asked you for anyone that's tuning in, as a part of this application process, are people able to stack licenses? Because as of now, for an adult use market, New York is very clear that there are no vertical licenses, correct?
So there is some limited stacking, and we can identify what can be stacked and what can't be stacked. Does the consumer interact with that? For example, if consumer doesn't interact with the cultivator or nursery, but it will interact with the delivery license, and that puts them on different sides, social consumption. If you have a cultivator license, if you have a processor license, if you have a nursery license, you might be able to stack those along with a distribution license. You won't be able to participate in any significant way in a social consumption license, or in a retail license, or in a delivery license, except for one and a half, I should say. The co-op license, which I don't know that we're going to get to here, but also the micro license. And the micro license is a smaller version of all the licenses wrapped up into one.
I was going to ask you, can you break down what a micro license is?
You have your nursery, you have your cultivation, your processing, you're probably not distributing anywhere, so it's just in-house, but you'll have your social consumption and your retail too.
Everything. Wow. That's incredible. And is there a limit to how large that business entity can be?
So we don't know yet. And I also want to make this distinction, because a lot of people get New York and New Jersey confused. We're separate, we're apart, there's a border. But another way that we're separate and apart is with what micro license means. Micro license is very specific in New York to mean all of these, to be a vertically integrated license on a smaller size. Micro license in New Jersey means a smaller type of a bigger license, not a vertically integrated license. And with that, there are some caps around employees. If you hear an employee cap at this point with respect to a micro license, they're not talking about New York, they're talking about New Jersey. There have been there have been proposals around micro licenses as far as sizes, but nothing hard and fast or even printed on official OCM paper yet, to my knowledge.
Christina, is there a vantage point between being an operation upstate versus downstate?
Land, real estate. I mean, come on, we live in New York, Gia, where
listen, I have to ask the question of the people.
No, I know.
Right? Like,
no,
and you and I know that New York City is a very vertical, condensed space, right? Even through the 5 boroughs. But when you go upstate, given the opportunities of these licenses, where you've mentioned nurseries and cultivations and processing, so that requires land, and then the micro, right, business. Imagine being able to have they stated yet with a micro that everything needs to be in one facility, or is it able to, does it need to be vertical, horizontal?
I think that the opportunity will exist for it to be across, not necessarily on one site, but you might be able to divide activities. And I say this because what we're seeing with other licenses is that, and with the conditional adult use cultivator license, they're allowing activities on non-contiguous plots. They have to be identified, and so I think that really opens the opportunity to have multiple locations under one license. And some of them, right, for a retail license, here's something interesting. For a retail license, each location goes with each license. So you can have 3 retail licenses, but you can't have multiple locations under one license per location. Now with something like a cultivator license, we know not only from the conditional, but also from MRTA, which again is the legislation that passed last year that gave us legal cannabis here in New York, also contemplates that cultivation activities might take place across a variety of areas.
Good to know. Good to know. Because again, as you stated, land, right? Like when you think about what the challenge is downstate, whereas there sounds like and feels like there are plenty of opportunity upstate, right? Because
I think that it's going to be incredible. Upstate is going to be the hub of cultivation. It just doesn't really make sense to cultivate in New York on the lower 5 boroughs and in any kind of material way. I've toured a couple of facilities where low key I thought this would make an incredible micro license. This is it. Like I would come here, but for the most part, I think it's going to be prohibitively expensive. And so it's really, when it comes to cultivation, upstate is where it's at.
I'm glad you're speaking to that, because many of the people that will be tuning in are based upstate, and I really want to speak more to that, especially as we've talked through the licensing opportunities and why there is such a better, I don't want to say chance, but there are better options upstate. And speaking to what you've just addressed in terms of land and in terms of just growth and expansion over time, right? Because I would imagine, just as you stated, even with the micro, that it could be spaced out. Well, you may not be ready for the consumption initially, right? And so having that option upstate, it sounds like it's a great place to start your business, or as a resident of upstate, it's a great time to consider this industry if you're sitting on the sidelines and thinking about it. Would you agree?
Absolutely. The time is now to get organized. And so I know one of the questions you said is there a checklist? And yeah, when you hire attorneys and when you hire writers, there's a checklist. But that doesn't mean you can't create your own checklist, checklist, right? And how do we create our own checklist? We go to primary sources. What are the primary sources in this case? The primary sources in this case are the regulations that we discussed that are available on OCM's website, as well as, because we are talking about cultivation, we're also talking about that initial guidance that was given by OCM, which has given the corners around what cultivation might look like going forward.
Yep.
And so by cruising the information that is already readily available to us, you can come out with those nuggets that you can bet that OCM is going to be asking for everyone. For example, things that have to do with entity formation, your EIN, your documents with the state showing formation or incorporation, your governing documents, any kind of key agreements that you're going to enter into. All of these things, start getting them together. Start thinking
identifying locations, possible locations. Is that worth it to do early on?
Well, when it comes to, yes, I mean, I think that you should always, I'm always looking at property. I mean, I think that if you are in this game, you should always be looking at property because you never know. And also there might be, or under the hemp program, there was also an opportunity, and there will be an opportunity for other tranches of cultivation where you might come across someone with property who just wants to rent it out. You have to show control of a property. You don't have to outright own it. And so I think that this is also a really interesting opportunity to start to get to know people who might be landowners and interested in participating and getting them involved, whereas individuals might not, or hopeful applicants might not have land of their own.
So you mentioned a checklist, and I want to circle back to that because I think it speaks to the application process. And I know you have firsthand experience on that, as you've already explained to us earlier on. But can you give us a sense on what that process is really like? So I established my EIN. I have some of my paperwork together, and I've identified you, Christina, as the person that's going to handle my application. What does that mean, really? Like, because I hear application and like, I'm about to fill out my passport application because I need to renew it, right? So I'm thinking, I can print it out. Why do I need someone? What is that application process like? Why do I need to go? Why not need, but why do people recommend that we go to?
Because you don't need, because at the end of the day, you don't need. And I do want to make this very, very clear. So there in the world that we call licensing, there's the actual application, there are standard operating procedures and other operational documents, right? And so when it comes to, or what we saw with when the portal for the conditional adult use cultivator license opened, it was pretty easy. It probably wasn't that different than your passport application, Gia, except you had to upload a lot of documents. The documents that I told you about that spoke to who, what entity is going to hold this conditional license? Who are the owners of that? What's your cap table look like? So that stuff, I have clients who did that all on their own. They didn't need me. They know how to run their stuff. I have clients who wouldn't be able to do that on their own because they might be less organized. Or they're, using this as an opportunity to bring additional capital into this new license. So there are some other caveats around that require some additional handholding. But by and large, the application itself, I mean, as I'm seeing, as New York has initially come out with their application, people will be able to do that on their own. And that's why I'm saying, I think you should still be able to access the online portal for the conditional cultivator license. And I recommend that people do that just to get a sense. It literally, I mean, I haven't applied to college in a long time, but I imagine you do it through a portal and you would upload essays or whatnot. It isn't, that in and of itself isn't difficult. When you start,
I will tell you though, I will say when we went to college, like the process was nowhere near as what these kids have to do to upload and apply for colleges. So that's a great analogy because there is a lot of uploading of documents and there's
different phases in terms of that uploading. So you're absolutely right. That's a great analogy. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I like this. I like this. Are we on StreamYard or Zoom? I say that it's not difficult, Gia, but we couldn't even get StreamYard to work earlier and we're on Zoom. So I have no business saying anything related to technology is easy. No business, but okay, I called myself out on that. Anyway.
Well, I know I don't want to take much more of your time up, but this is really the crux of what people are looking for when coming into this industry. So they've identified someone to help them through the application process. How long does that generally take, the application process?
So the application process, it depends. We don't know yet because the conditional,
depends on the type of application, correct?
Right, and also the tranche, because with this initial conditional adult use cultivator license, people were notified and then they had licenses within days, or I shouldn't say days, within weeks, because they had already gone through a quasi pre-approval process by virtue of the fact that they had been growing hemp under New York.
Right,
so that was a substitute. It made sense. The other question is, when a portal opens, is it going to be, can I use another college? I don't know if they still do this. Is it going to be rolling admissions or is there a cutoff date? That's another thing. I just don't know. And I mean, I get this because when let's pull back for a minute and talk about the conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses, right? The state is going to tell you, this is your location, that is your location. They're physically going to, or they're going to identify the locations that they have secured for each license applicant. Now, what happens?
That's very different than someone else going after.
Correct. It's totally different. It is wildly different. And that's why I say, this is an incredible opportunity, but there are going to be things that the state tells you have to look and feel a certain way. I mean, it's a regulated industry, let's be honest. They're going to tell you how everything has to look and feel. But even down to on a rolling basis, first come, first serve. And they might have a more choice pick of locations, or is it going to be everyone's open until that day, that end date, and then everyone is evaluated? We can keep on going with these college,
No, because it honestly is a great analogy, because you're right, those rolling acceptances, right, versus no, we're capped out. And so my last two questions, are attorneys necessary for these applications?
No. I mean, I'm not trying to talk myself out of business, but no. I mean, here's when you need an attorney. When you are talking money with other people, when you are signing up for terms that are going to limit what you can do, what you can't do, that really bind you to someone. It is, which means anytime you enter into an agreement with another person, you want an attorney there, right? If you're doing this as a solo member LLC, you don't need an attorney. You can pull stuff off of LegalZoom. You can upload your documents. You do not need an attorney. Now, as soon as you start signing paperwork with other people, you need an attorney.
Well, how can people connect with you? Because you have I think it's the best segue, because while you said you don't need an attorney, we also know that whether if you're operating in the cannabis industry, and we already know we've got regulations, but it's very tricky. And if you do not understand it, we don't want anyone to jeopardize their license, or whether they're getting or not getting without being properly advised. And at least to be able to go to someone that has cannabis law experience, because that's also the difference. You don't just go and find any attorney. You need someone that actually understands the laws of our industry, correct? But where can they find you?
I'm on social media, not well, but I'm there at CB Council. And you can also reach out to me at CB at CB Council.
and your website, which
there's a .com there.
Yes, I was going to say there's cbcouncil.com because I actually went to her site, and you'll see, I mean, she's got incredible just incredible background and tons of media. Like, she's been in the news, and it's an honor to speak with you, my friend, because you really drop a ton of gems and save a lot of people from going down just these sort of winding roads of confusion. It's not an easy process. And I appreciate that you explained, even for the bare minimum, because I think sometimes, again, we take this information for granted because we work in it day in and day out. But this information is for the people who are looking to get in, or those who are newbies and are looking to really expand their business reach. And, you know, for current people who, I'm cheating because this is a bonus question.
Okay. Ooh, I like it.
An ancillary business. While we're here to talk about license opportunities, there's also, and you're an ancillary business in the industry. I'm an ancillary business in the industry. What are those opportunities, and what do they look like? And are they pairing with licensed operators?
So they're essential. I'm going to say something maybe not very popular. They may end up being initially more profitable than certain licenses, because all of that profit gets reinvested. And there are so many possibilities and opportunities to transition into cannabis if you already have a skill set that supports other business services. Learning about the industry is super important. And I forgot the other part of that question. I'm so sorry.
So, well, no, but that's great. I think so can they partner, like yourself, you're an ancillary business. You partner and support with operations by being their attorney, by being their legal consultant, by being a professor. You're an adjunct professor. You're an educator.
Job.
So that's great to explain, because again, when thinking about upstate, yes, there can be tons of cultivations, tons of processing, but we need those ancillary businesses as well to support the industry.
That's right.
And so they're essential. And you said, while people may not, don't give up in terms of if you do not fit within these social equity criteria, there's still licenses to apply for. And if you still don't feel comfortable there in that space, what you're ultimately telling us is that whatever you're currently doing, if you are a business owner serving mainstream or other types of businesses, you can look at and consider how you can support the cannabis industry by providing the same services that you're doing now.
And just a final thought on that, and this goes for anyone that you meet, well, most people that you meet. You reach a certain echelon of, let's say, lawyer or PR, and they know what they're doing. You can go and you see the credentials, and it's very difficult to distinguish at some point among professionals, particularly in the ancillary business. And my advice is, this is a personality fit. I tell everyone who comes to me, when you hire me, it's a personality fit. I am not for everyone, but I am for the people I am for. And by and large, it's a personality fit. People want to work with you because you're going to be telling your lawyer lots of little things, and you have to be completely comfortable with being 100% honest with them, because when you don't, details show up in the 11th hour and bite you in the ass, like my dog is about to do to someone else. I'm sorry. Chica.
No. That's a great way to close, because you said basically in retaining an attorney, especially in this process, you don't want to lie on those applications. You want to tell the truth. You want to share as much information as you can, and you're going to have to be open and honest about that with the person that's representing you.
That's right.
Christina, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This was truly a master class on licensing opportunities in New York State. And I encourage you that please Her handle is there at CB Council. Her name is Christina without an H, so it's Christina. Be sure to look for Christina Bacola, look up her website, go and Google her. You will learn a whole lot about her. Look, she's got the street cred.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, hearing that from you means a lot.
Fossil Rod.
This is the original instrumental.
It's like we're
I
winding.
keep saying hello, and my mic is always muted. I don't know why I keep doing that. We are back, everyone. Thank you. That was a great segment about licensing. What was your take on it, guys over there, and Tamika?
It was an incredible segment. So much information packed into one day. I know everybody's gonna definitely want that write up. But it just really phenomenally laid out all of the different criteria for the license, and a lot of people don't have the understanding that there are other ways to enter into that cannabis business without having to actually physically even touch the plant. And one of the biggest takeaways is also the micro businesses. That is a phenomenal way for especially business owners of color to enter into the industry and be able to get started. And the other thing I just wanted to really point out that is key, and something that I know that Season Gives and I know HVADC has been really working on, is talking about the legislation and talking about how we can make some access for people of color in particular, because many times we don't have that access to all of those paperwork needs. And how can the state now help to trailblaze and create some of that access, especially for the people who have been most marginalized?
I agree 100%. How about you, John and Kari?
Yeah, I thought it was incredible. Gia and Christina really shed a lot of light on the mechanics of the process, and also what I took away from it. And I saw a comment in the chat, this idea of needing all of the legal representation, all the professional expertise to be able to navigate the process. But I really got a sense of encouragement from Gia and Christina that this can be done. It is a very tedious and deep process, but to go online and to start to kind of tease around with what's out there and see how the sort of application process actually works, I thought was really great advice, and also that sense of encouragement. And I get the sense, and just being in this space and covering it as a journalist, I think the folks who are out here, doing this version of intellectual sharing and resource sharing are here because there's a passion for this space. There's a passion to also think about this emerging economy as something that should be looked at with the lens of equity and sort of notions of justice and righting wrongs and things like that. And then also, just in general, this is something that all communities, again, should have access to. And the pie in so many spaces has been carved up and given out. So what does it look like to be starting from the ground floor and building something? So thanks to everyone for sort of like that level of transparency and clarity around process, but then also the sense of encouragement.
Yeah, and I agree with Kyrie and the rest of you. And I talk to Christina every now and then. I still learn something new every time I talk to her. And having filled out a couple of these applications with people, they are very doable. I know you may feel this anxiety and you get worked up, but college applications are harder than this one. But you do have to feel comfortable being transparent. They're going to ask you about your financial situation, about any criminal record in the past. And, it is what it is. It's worth it. Just get it out there and get the business done. We ran a little bit overtime today, but I think it was worth it because, these guys are just dropping knowledge. And, what we really wanted you folks to come away with, and this is only day one, we want to come away with a sense that you're a lot more conversant in the space. I mean, when someone is telling you, oh yeah, dispensaries are legal already, and this is legal, and that you'll know the real deal, and you'll just be that much more education, because education is a weapon in a lot of ways. It'll help you a lot. So on day 2, next week, Monday, same time, same bad channel as Tanya says, we will dig into the dispensary business, the other sexy part of the business. We'll dig into product development. So how do and that'll cover extraction and manufacturing. I want to develop a product. How do I do that? And we have some really smart makers in that space there. We'll talk about cannabis technology. We'll have 2 companies who are working in the cannabis space on the tech side to talk you through how that can help you enhance your business or elevate your brand. And that's going to be very important. And you'll hear from the Hudson Valley Cannabis Industry Association, the New York City Cannabis Industry Association, to tell you how you can get involved and stay plugged in and stay in the network and get on some committees. So you'll be in the OCM's office, either if you're on the ag committee, you may be on the medical marijuana committee, you may be on the dispensary committee. You got to be on a committee because you got to stay plugged in, as some of our panelists previously mentioned to you. So that's what, it's coming up next week. Plus we'll have some guests dropping in. We're already planning the next version of this. But this has been lots of fun. Anything else? Did I leave out anything, guys? Are we good?
Thank you so much for this first part.
That was great.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. It's time for cocktails or mocktail if you're in the CBD space. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one, everybody.
Soulful music.